The crowd fell silent as the auctioneer dragged a terrified Omega onto the platform, her pup clutching her torn dress. "Sold to settle her traitor mate's debts," he announced. Bidding started at 50 silver. The Omega's jasmine scent cut through the air, and that's when he arrived. The Alpha King. Every wolf in the square dropped to their knees as his presence rolled over them like thunder. His eyes locked on the Omega, wolf gold and blazing. The bond snapped into place so violently he staggered. "Mine!" his beast roared. He strode forward, power crackling around him. "I'll take them both." "Name your price." The auctioneer paled. "Your Majesty, pack law forbids." The king's growl shook the platform. "I am the law." This is the moment that started it all, but it's only the beginning. If you're already rooting for this broken Omega to find her strength, for this ruthless king to discover his heart, and for this little pup to finally have the father he deserves, show me by smashing that like button before we continue their story. Now let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Auction. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the neutral territory marketplace, but Lucille Davies barely felt the heat. Terror had turned her blood to ice as rough hands shoved her onto the auction platform, her 3-year-old son Blake clinging to her skirts and whimpering in confusion. "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the crowd of wolves who'd gathered for the monthly trade fair. Omega female, age 24, and her pup, being sold to settle the debts of the traitor Jeremiah Davies, executed 3 months past for conspiracy against the crown." Lucille's legs threatened to give out. They'd taken everything: her home, her possessions, even her mate's body for a proper burial. Now they were taking her freedom, selling her and Blake like livestock to the highest bidder. She pulled Blake closer, his small body trembling against her legs. His honey-brown hair was matted with dirt from their 3 days in the holding cells, and his wide hazel eyes were red from crying. He was too young to understand what was happening, only that his mother was frightened and strangers were staring at them. "Bidding starts at 50 silver, the auctioneer continued. "The Omega's young enough for breeding, and the pup's already showing alpha traits, could be valuable in a few years." Lucille's stomach turned. They were discussing her son like he was a horse being evaluated for stud potential. 60 silver, called a gruff voice from the crowd. Lucille's eyes found the speaker a scarred beta wolf with calculating eyes and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey even from 15 feet away. 70, countered a weasel-faced merchant she recognized from the textile district. The auctioneer's grin widened. "Do I hear 80? Lucille scanned the crowd desperately, looking for any sign of mercy, any familiar face who might help. But the wolves of neutral territory were scavengers by nature, always looking for profit in others' misfortune. Her own pack had disowned her the moment Jeremiah was arrested, afraid his treason would taint them by association. She was alone. 85. The beta called, stepping closer to the platform. His eyes traveled over Lucille's body in a way that made her skin crawl. "I could use a house, Omega. And the pup can work the stables when he's older." Blake buried his face in Lucille's skirts, his small hands fisting in the fabric. She stroked his hair with shaking fingers, trying to offer comfort she didn't feel. 90 silver, the merchant countered. "The pup's too valuable to waste in stables. I'll sell him to a training house when he reaches 10. Horror crashed over Lucille. They were planning to separate them, to take her son away and sell him like... The air changed. It happened so suddenly that Lucille gasped, her Omega instinct screaming in response to the surge of power that rolled across the marketplace like an invisible wave. Every wolf in the square froze, their conversations dying mid-word. Then, as one, they dropped to their knees. Lucille's own knees buckled, the compulsion to submit overwhelming. Only her desperate grip on Blake kept her partially upright, and she pulled him down with her, sheltering him with her body as primal fear. And something else, something electric and intoxicating, flooded through her veins. The crowd parted like water as he walked through. The Alpha King. Lucille had never seen him in person, but there was no mistaking who he was. Power radiated from him in palpable waves, and his presence alone was enough to make every wolf in the vicinity bare their throats in instinctive submission. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and moving with the lethal grace of a predator. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes locked on hers. They flashed from stormy gray to brilliant gold, his wolf rising to the surface. Lucille felt the world tilt as something inside her chest pulled taut, then snapped into place with such force she cried out. Heat flooded through her body, not the heat of her cycle but something far more profound. Every nerve ending came alive, hyper-aware of the alpha striding toward her platform. The bond. The mate bond. No. That was impossible. Mates were chosen by the moon goddess herself, rare and precious. Lucille had married Jeremiah out of arrangement, never experiencing the legendary pull of a true mate. She couldn't be feeling it now. Not with mine. The word was barely human, more growl than speech. The Alpha King's canines had extended, his wolf clearly at the surface and fighting for control. The auctioneer stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Your Majesty. We had no idea you would be. This is just a routine. How much? The king's voice was rough, his eyes never leaving Lucille's face. The intensity of his gaze made her feel stripped bare, seen in a way she'd never experienced. I what? The auctioneer stammered. How much? Each word was bitten off with barely restrained violence. For the Omega and her pup. Your Majesty, with all respect, pack law clearly states that an alpha of your rank cannot. The growl that erupted from the king's chest rattled the platform beneath Lucille's feet. Several wolves in the crowd whimpered, pressing their faces to the ground. Blake whimpered too, and Lucille held him tighter, her own wolf torn between terror and a strange, overwhelming sense of rightness. I am the law. The king snarled, his eyes blazing gold. Now name your price before I decide this entire auction is an offense against the crown, and shut it down permanently. The auctioneer's hands shook as he consulted his ledger. The debt is 300 silver, Your Majesty. The king reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch, which he threw at the auctioneer with enough force that the man fumbled the catch. Coins spilled across the platform, not silver but gold. That's 500, the king said. Consider the debt paid and the matter closed. He turned his burning gaze to the crowd, his lip curling. If anyone has objections, step forward now and we'll settle it the old way. No one moved. No one even breathed. Satisfied, the king climbed onto the platform in one fluid motion. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, tall enough that Lucille had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and radiating heat like a furnace. His scent hit her like a physical force, pine and smoke and something wild that made her Omega whine. What's your name? His voice had gentled slightly, though his wolf still lurked just beneath the surface. Lucille, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucille Davies. And the pup? Blake. His name is Blake. She pulled her son from where he'd hidden in her skirts, turning him to face the king. Blake, this is the big bad wolf, Blake whispered, his eyes enormous. Despite the tension, the king's mouth twitched. He crouched down to Blake's level, making himself less intimidating. I suppose I am, he said quietly. But I'm not here to hurt you or your mama. I'm here to keep you safe. Can you be brave for me? Blake studied him with the serious intensity only small children could manage. Then, to Lucille's shock, her son reached out and touched the king's face, his tiny fingers trailing over the alpha's jaw. The king went utterly still. You have sad eyes, Blake announced. Like mama. Are you sad too? Something flickered across the king's face, surprise, pain, and something softer. Sometimes, he admitted. But maybe not anymore. He straightened and turned back to Lucille, extending his hand. Will you come with me, both of you? Lucille stared at his offered hand, her mind reeling. This was insane. The Alpha King had just purchased her at auction, claimed they were mates based on one look, and was now asking her to go with him as if she had a choice. Except she looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. She did have a choice. He was asking, not commanding. Despite his power, despite the mate bond pulling at her chest like a fishhook, he was giving her the option to refuse. Where, she asked. Where would we go? My palace. You'll have your own rooms, protection, anything you and Blake need. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his features. I know this is sudden. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I swear on my position and my life that no harm will come to you under my protection. The mate bond pulsed between them, urging her to accept, to trust. But Lucille had learned the hard way that bonds could be deceiving, that promises meant nothing without action to back them up. Still, what choice did she really have? Return to the auction block? Let the beta with cruel eyes or the merchant who wanted to sell her son take them instead? At least with the king, she might have a chance. All right, she whispered. We'll come. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it took her breath away. He wrapped his hand gently around hers, and the moment their skin touched, electricity arced between them. Lucille gasped, and the king's pupils dilated, his wolf rising again in response to the contact. Easy, he murmured, though she wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or himself. We need to go. Now. Before I do something that will give the council even more reason to object to this. He guided her and Blake off the platform, his large hand never leaving the small of her back. The crowd remained on their knees as they passed, and Lucille caught sight of the beta who'd been bidding on them. His face was twisted with rage, and something that looked like fear. She pressed closer to the king, instinctively seeking his protection. A massive black carriage waited at the edge of the marketplace, guarded by 4 wolves in the crimson uniforms of the royal guard. They snapped to attention as their king approached, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of Lucille and Blake but wisely saying nothing. We're returning to the palace, the king ordered. Send riders ahead to prepare the east wing, and inform the council that I'll be addressing them within the hour. Yes, your majesty. The guards moved with military precision, 2 mounting horses to ride ahead, while the others took positions at the carriage doors. The king helped Lucille and Blake inside, his touch careful, almost reverent. The interior was luxurious beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Plush velvet seats, gleaming wood panels, and windows covered with silk curtains that could be drawn for privacy. Blake's eyes went wide with wonder. Mama, it's like a fairy tale. It certainly feels like one, Lucille murmured, settling onto the seat with her son in her lap. The king climbed in after them, taking the seat across from her. The moment the door closed, some of the tension bled from his shoulders. He dragged a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time, Lucille saw him as a man rather than just a force of nature. I should introduce myself properly, he said. My name is Roman Robinson, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I know who you are, Lucille said quietly. Everyone does. Roman smiled faintly. Yes, but you should know the name of the male who just turned your life upside down. His expression grew serious. I need you to understand something, Lucille. What happened back there, the mate bond, it's real. I felt it the moment I saw you. My wolf recognized you instantly. I felt it too, she admitted, her hand unconsciously moving to her chest where the bond had anchored itself. But I don't understand. I was already mated. Jeremiah was not your true mate, Roman interrupted gently. The moon goddess chooses only one true mate for each wolf. Jeremiah was your husband, and I'm sure you cared for him. But this, he gestured between them. This is something different. Something rare. Lucille absorbed this, her mind spinning. Everything she'd believed about mates, about destiny, was being rewritten in the span of minutes. What happens now? She asked. The council, you said they would object. What does that mean for us? Roman's expression darkened. The council follows old laws, traditions that claim an Alpha King must choose a mate of equal rank. Taking you as my mate and Omega from a family marked by treason will cause significant political upheaval. Fear clenched in Lucille's stomach. Then maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just let us go, find somewhere to. No. The word was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Roman leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. I have waited 34 years for my mate, Lucille. I have ruled alone, slept alone, lived half a life because the moon goddess had not yet seen fit to give me my other half. Now that I've found you, now that I know you exist, his voice roughened, I would burn my kingdom to ash before I let you go. The fierce possession in his words should have terrified her. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. The council will challenge us, Roman continued. There will be political consequences, possibly even attempts on your life, but I need you to know that I will protect you and Blake with everything I have. You are mine to defend now. Yours, Lucille repeated, testing the word. It should have felt wrong, like chains. Instead it felt like shelter. Blake, who had been quietly watching their exchange, tugged on Roman's sleeve. Are you going to be my new papa? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Roman's eyes met Lucille's over Blake's head, seeking permission. She gave a tiny nod. "Would you like that?" Roman asked Blake gently. Blake considered this with childish seriousness. "My old papa went away and made Mama cry. Will you make Mama cry?" "Not if I can help it," Roman promised. "I want to make her smile instead." "Okay." Blake nodded decisively. "Then you can be my papa." Roman's expression transformed the harsh lines of his face, softening into something almost tender. He reached out slowly, giving Blake time to pull away, and ruffled the boy's hair. "Then I'll do my best to be a good one." As the carriage rolled through the countryside toward the palace, Lucille watched Roman interact with her son, answering Blake's endless questions with surprising patience. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and insistent, urging her closer. She didn't know what awaited them at the palace. She didn't know how they would navigate the political storms ahead, or whether she could truly trust this powerful alpha who had claimed her so suddenly. But for the first time since Jeremiah's arrest, since her world had crumbled around her, Lucille felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Chapter 2. The Palace. The palace rose from the landscape like something out of Blake's favorite storybook, all towering spires and ancient stone that seemed to glow golden in the late afternoon sun. As the carriage wound up the mountain road, Lucille pressed her face to the window, hardly believing such a place could be real. "It's big," Blake breathed, his nose leaving a smudge on the glass. "Really? Really big." Roman chuckled from his seat across from them. "It's been home to my family for 7 generations. Parts of it date back over 300 years. He glanced at Lucille, catching her stunned expression. "I know it's overwhelming. You'll get used to it." Lucille wasn't sure about that. The palace was easily 10 times larger than any building she'd ever seen, with wings sprawling in multiple directions and formal gardens stretching as far as she could see. Guards in crimson uniforms stood at attention at regular intervals along the walls, and she could feel the hum of power emanating from the structure itself, ancient magic woven into the very stones. The carriage rolled through massive iron gates decorated with wolves in mid-leap, then into a courtyard where a small army of servants had assembled. They stood in precise lines, their faces carefully neutral, though Lucille caught several curious glances directed at her and Blake. Roman's expression shifted as he took in the welcoming committee, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "They couldn't wait even an hour," he muttered. "What?" Lucille asked. Before he could answer, the carriage door opened. Roman stepped out first, then turned to help Lucille down. The moment her feet touched the cobblestones, she felt every eye in the courtyard on her. Her dress was stained and torn from her days in the holding cell, her hair hung in tangles down her back, and she undoubtedly looked like exactly what she was, a desperate Omega who'd been sold at auction. Shame burned through her, but Roman's hand settled firmly at the small of her back, grounding her. "Keep your head up," he murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Blake clung to her hand as they walked toward the palace entrance. A tall, severe-looking woman in elegant gray robes stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Lucille's appearance with obvious disapproval. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice cool. "The council has assembled in the throne room, as you requested. They are eager to discuss this matter." "I'm sure they are, Helene." Roman's tone suggested he knew exactly what kind of discussion awaited him. "This is Lucille Davies and her son Blake. They'll be staying in the East Wing. Please ensure they have everything they need." Helene's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be more appropriate to house them in the guest quarters until the council." "The East Wing," Roman repeated, his voice dropping into a tone that brooked no argument. "And they are not guests, Helene. They are under my direct protection. See that everyone understands that." The woman's expression remained neutral, but Lucille caught the flash of something in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or concern. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Roman turned to Lucille, his stern demeanor softening. "Helene is the palace steward. She'll see that you and Blake are settled. I need to deal with the council, but I'll come find you as soon as I can." Lucille nodded, trying not to show how terrified she was at the thought of him leaving. The mate bond pulled at her chest, her wolf whining at the prospect of separation. Roman must have sensed her distress because he stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek. The touch sent electricity racing through her nerves. "You're safe here," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. I promise. No one will harm you. Then, before she could respond, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. The gesture was chaste, protective, rather than possessive, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Several of the assembled servants gasped audibly. When Roman pulled back, his eyes had gone gold again, his wolf responding to their proximity. Soon, he murmured, the word heavy with promise. Then he turned and strode into the palace, his long coat billowing behind him. Lucille stood frozen, her hand rising to touch where his lips had been. The imprint of his kiss seemed burned into her skin. This way, please. Helene's crisp voice broke through her daze. The steward was already walking toward a side entrance, clearly expecting to be followed. Lucille lifted Blake into her arms. He was getting heavy, but she needed the comfort of holding him and hurried after Helene. They entered the palace through a servant's corridor, probably to avoid parading her through the main halls in her current state, and Lucille was grateful for the consideration even if it was motivated by embarrassment rather than kindness. The interior of the palace was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Every surface seemed to gleam: polished marble floors, gilded picture frames, crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow prisms across the walls. Lucille had to resist the urge to tell Blake not to touch anything, afraid his curious fingers would break something priceless. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and walked down what felt like miles of corridors before Helen finally stopped in front of an ornate door carved with wolves and crescent moons. The east wing was Queen Miranda's favorite, Helene said, producing a key from her robes. It's been closed since her death 15 years ago. His Majesty had it opened and prepared this morning, which I confess surprised the staff considerably. This morning? Lucille's mind reeled. Roman had prepared rooms for her this morning, hours before he'd even arrived at the auction, before he'd even known she existed. Helene pushed open the door, revealing a suite of rooms that took Lucille's breath away. The main sitting room was larger than the entire house she'd shared with Jeremiah, decorated in rich blues and silvers. Plush sofas sat before a marble fireplace, thick rugs covered the floors, and tall windows overlooked the gardens below. Doorways led to what appeared to be a bedroom, a bathing room, and another smaller room that might be perfect for Blake. The bedroom adjoins His Majesty's personal chambers, Helene said, watching Lucille's reaction carefully. There is a connecting door, though it locks from both sides. Lucille's cheeks heated at the implication. She and Roman were mates. Eventually that door would be used, but the fact that it could be locked gave her control, choice. That meant something. Blake wiggled out of her arms and immediately began exploring, running from room to room with delighted exclamations. Mama, look. There's a bed big enough for giants. And the bathtub is huge. Can we put Bubbles in it? Despite everything, Lucille smiled. Blake's resilience never ceased to amaze her. Hours ago they'd been on an auction block, facing an uncertain future. And now he was excited about Bubbles. I'll send up hot water for baths, Helene said. And appropriate clothing for you both. Dinner will be served in 2 hours, though I suspect His Majesty will be occupied with the council for some time yet. Thank you, Lucille said quietly. Then, because she needed to know, the council, they're angry about us, aren't they? Helene's expression remained neutral, but something almost like sympathy flickered in her eyes. The council's opinions are not my concern. My duty is to serve His Majesty and ensure his household runs smoothly. She paused at the door. However, I will say this. King Roman is the strongest alpha we've had in 3 generations. Whatever the council thinks, he will do as he sees fit. After Helene left, Lucille sank onto one of the sofas, her legs finally giving out. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave: the auction, the mate bond, Roman's fierce claim, and now this impossible palace that was somehow supposed to be her home. Blake climbed onto the sofa beside her, snuggling under her arm. I like it here, Mama. It smells good. Like trees and something else. That's the Alpha King you smell, Lucille said, pressing a kiss to his hair. The palace was saturated with Roman's scent: pine and smoke and wild places. Her Omega responded to it instinctively, her wolf settling in a way it hadn't since before Jeremiah's arrest. He seems nice, Blake said thoughtfully. Even if he is scary, will he really be my papa? Lucille's throat tightened. I don't know, sweetheart. Everything is very complicated right now. Complicated is what grown-ups say when they don't want to explain. Blake observed with a child's brutal honesty. Before Lucille could formulate a response, a knock sounded at the door. She tensed, but relaxed slightly when a young Omega woman entered carrying an enormous pile of towels. "Begging your pardon, miss," the woman said with a shy smile. "I'm Sean Moyer. I've been assigned as your lady's maid." She set down the towels and bobbed an awkward curtsy. "The hot water's coming up now for your baths, and I've brought some clothes that should fit until the seamstress can take proper measurements tomorrow." Lady's maid. Seamstress. The words felt surreal. Yesterday Lucille had been sleeping on a stone floor in a cell. Now she had servants. "Thank you, Sean," she managed. "You're very kind." Sean's smile widened. "Oh, it's my pleasure, miss. It's been so long since there was a lady in the palace. And with you being the king's mate." She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening. "I mean, I shouldn't presume, but everyone's talking about how His Majesty claimed you at the auction, and the way he looked at you when you arrived." She was babbling now, clearly realizing she'd overstepped. "It's all right," Lucille said gently, taking pity on the flustered girl. "Yes, we're mates. Though I'm still trying to understand what that means." "It means everything's about to change," Sean said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The palace hasn't felt this alive in years. We've all been waiting for His Majesty to find his mate, and now she caught herself again. I'll just get that bath ready, shall I?" As Sean bustled into the bathing room, Lucille heard the sounds of water being poured and tested. More servants arrived with clothing, food, and toys for Blake. Within minutes, the quiet suite had become a hive of activity. Lucille let herself be guided to the bathing room, where a massive copper tub was being filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender and something sweet she couldn't identify. Sean helped her undress, carefully setting aside her ruined dress. "We'll burn this," Sean said matter-of-factly. "You'll never need to wear rags again, miss." The water was heaven. Lucille sank into it up to her chin, feeling weeks of grime and fear washing away. Sean worked carefully through the tangles in her hair, chattering about palace life and asking gentle questions about Blake. It wasn't until Lucille was clean, dressed in a borrowed gown of soft green silk, and watching Blake splash in his own bath that the reality of her situation truly hit her. She was the Alpha King's mate. She would be queen. And somewhere in this vast palace, Roman was fighting for the right to keep her. In the throne room, Roman faced the council with barely controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. The 12 council members sat in a semicircle before the throne, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. At the center sat Victor Serrano, the council's head and Roman's most persistent opponent. "You cannot be serious," Victor said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You purchase an Omega from an auction, an Omega whose mate was executed for treason, and expect us to accept her as queen." "I expect you to respect the mate bond," Roman growled. "Or do you question the moon goddess's choice? The moon goddess's ways are mysterious." Another council member, Samuel Dixon, interjected smoothly. "But pack law is clear. The Alpha King must take a mate of appropriate rank and bloodline. This woman has neither." Roman's hands clenched on the arms of his throne. "Lucille is my true mate. That supersedes all other considerations." "Does it?" Victor leaned forward. "Your father understood the importance of political alliances. He married your mother to unite two powerful packs. You should do the same." "My father also died young and unhappy," Roman snapped. "I will not repeat his mistakes." "Then what of heirs?" Samuel pressed. "The bloodline must be considered. This Omega's pup is not of your blood. Will you claim him as your own? And what of future children? Her mate was a traitor, who's to say that taint won't pass to her offspring?" Roman surged to his feet, his wolf rising so close to the surface that his eyes blazed pure gold. The temperature in the room dropped as his power rolled outward, pressing down on every wolf present. Several council members gasped, baring their throats in submission. "Blake is mine," Roman said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I claim him as my son and heir. Any who question his legitimacy will answer to me personally." Victor remained upright through sheer force of will, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "Your Majesty, please be reasonable. The Pax will never accept." "The Pax will accept what I tell them to accept," Roman interrupted. I am the Alpha King. My word is law. He let his gaze travel across each council member in turn. Lucille is my mate. Blake is my son. They will be treated with the respect due to the royal family. Anyone who threatens them, insults them, or questions their place will be dealt with swiftly and without mercy. Am I understood? Silence hung heavy in the throne room. Finally, Victor inclined his head. As you command, Your Majesty. Though I fear you underestimate the consequences of this decision. And I fear you overestimate your importance to me, Roman replied coldly. This council exists to advise, not to rule. If you cannot fulfill that function, I will find those who can. He dismissed them with a curt gesture and strode from the throne room before his wolf could push him to do something he'd regret, like rip out Victor's throat. The urge was strong. The man had dared to speak of Lucille as if she were beneath consideration, had questioned Blake's worth as if a 3-year-old child could be held accountable for his father's crimes. Roman's hands shook with suppressed rage as he made his way through the palace corridors. He needed to see Lucille, to reassure himself that she was safe and here and real. The mate bond pulled at him, stronger now that she was within the palace walls, urging him toward the east wing. He found himself standing outside her door, his hand raised to knock, when he heard it Lucille's laughter, genuine and warm, mixing with Blake's delighted giggles and a younger female voice he recognized as Sean's. Roman's wolf settled at the sound. His mate was happy, safe, laughing. He lowered his hand. She'd been through enough today without him barging in and bringing the weight of his political problems with him. She needed time to adjust, to find her footing in this new world. But tomorrow, he promised himself, tomorrow he would begin showing her what it meant to be cherished by her mate. With that thought, Roman retreated to his own chambers, already planning how to win the heart of the Omega the moon goddess had finally sent him. Chapter 3. Breaking Barriers. Lucille woke to sunlight streaming through silk curtains and momentarily forgot where she was. The bed beneath her was so soft she felt like she was floating, and the sheets smelled of lavender and something distinctly male that made her wolf purr with contentment. The palace. She was in the palace, Roman's mate. She sat up quickly, her heart racing as yesterday's events flooded back. Blake was still asleep beside her, his small body curled into a ball, one hand clutching the stuffed wolf toy that had mysteriously appeared on his pillow sometime during the night. She suspected Roman had left it, though she hadn't heard him enter. The connecting door between their chambers remained closed and locked from her side. She'd turned the key last night after Sean had left, needing that barrier even if it was only symbolic. Her wolf had whined at the separation from their mate, but Lucille's human side needed time to process everything. A soft knock at the main door made her jump. "Miss?" Sean's cheerful voice called. "I've brought breakfast." Lucille quickly grabbed a robe silk, impossibly fine, and padded to the door. Sean entered with a cart laden with more food than Lucille and Blake could eat in a week. Fresh bread, fruit, eggs, bacon, pastries, and what looked like hot chocolate. "Good morning," Sean said brightly, setting up the food on a small table near the windows. "His Majesty left instructions that you weren't to be disturbed until you woke naturally. He said you needed rest after yesterday's ordeal." "Where is he?" Lucille asked, then mentally kicked herself for sounding so eager. Sean smiled knowingly. "He's been in meetings with the territorial governors since dawn, but he asked me to tell you that he'll join you for lunch if you're willing." She produced a small sealed note from her pocket. "He also asked me to give you this." Lucille took the note with trembling fingers. The paper was expensive, and the seal was Roman's personal crest. She broke it open and read, "Lucille, I apologize for my absence this morning. Unfortunately, ruling a kingdom requires considerably more paperwork than I'd prefer. I hope you and Blake rested well. If you're feeling overwhelmed, please don't hesitate to say so. I know I've thrown you into an impossible situation with very little preparation. We can take this as slowly as you need. However, I would very much like to see you today. Would you join me for lunch in the garden? Say 12 o'clock? Blake is welcome too, of course. I've had the groundskeeper set up some toys I think he might enjoy. Until then, Roman." The note was simple, direct, and unexpectedly thoughtful. Lucille found herself reading it twice, trying to reconcile the formal king who'd faced down his counsel yesterday with the man who remembered to mention toys for her son. "What should I wear?" she asked Sean, suddenly nervous. I don't want to embarrass him. Sean's expression softened. Oh, miss, His Majesty wouldn't be embarrassed by you if you showed up in a sack. You should see the way he looks at you. She moved to the wardrobe, which had been filled overnight with dresses in various styles. But let's find you something pretty anyway. The seamstress will be here this afternoon for measurements, but these should do until your wardrobe is complete. Blake woke while Lucille was getting dressed, immediately excited by the prospect of seeing the big palace in daylight. Sean helped him into clothes that actually fit, a small miracle after months of making do with whatever they could scavenge. By the time 12 o'clock arrived, Lucille was dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair pulled back in a soft style that Sean had insisted made her look like a proper lady. Blake wore tiny trousers and a shirt that made him look like a miniature gentleman. Sean guided them through the palace corridors, pointing out various rooms and wings along the way. That's the library, 3 floors of books, if you can believe it. And that's the portrait gallery, though it's a bit stuffy with all those dead ancestors staring down at you. Oh. And that leads to the training grounds where the guards practice. His Majesty spends at least 2 hours there every morning. They emerged into a walled garden that took Lucille's breath away. Flowering vines climbed stone walls, creating pockets of shade and privacy. A fountain burbled in the center, and paths wound between carefully tended beds of roses, lavender, and flowers Lucille couldn't name. And there, at a table set beneath a large oak tree, sat Roman. He stood the moment he saw them, and Lucille's heart did something complicated in her chest. He'd removed his formal jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, and his hair was slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked more relaxed than he had yesterday, though she could still see tension in his shoulders. "Lucille," he said, and the warmth in his voice made her wolf practically dance. "Blake. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us," Lucille replied, aware of Sean retreating discreetly. "Your note it was very kind." Roman's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I can write a decent letter when necessary. It's verbal communication I struggle with." He gestured to the table, where lunch had been laid out. "Please, sit. I thought we could eat outside since the weather's nice." Blake, who had been hanging back shyly, suddenly noticed something behind Roman and gasped. "Mama, look, swings." Sure enough, someone had installed a small swing set near the garden wall, along with a sandbox and several wooden toys. Blake looked up at Lucille with pleading eyes. "After we eat," she told him firmly, then glanced at Roman. "Was this your doing?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I had the groundskeeper pull them out of storage this morning. They were mine when I was Blake's age. I thought." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "I want him to be happy here." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, made Lucille's eyes sting. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." They settled at the table, and for a few minutes the conversation was awkward small talk about the food, the weather, Blake's excited chatter about his giant bed. But gradually, as they ate, the tension began to ease. "How did the council meeting go?" Lucille asked quietly, watching Blake chase a butterfly near the fountain. Roman's expression darkened. "About as well as expected. They have concerns about our mating." "Because I'm a trader's widow," Lucille said flatly. "Because I have no rank or bloodline worth mentioning. Because Blake isn't your biological son. Because they're short-sighted fools who care more about politics than people," Roman corrected, his voice tight with anger. "But they'll come around. They have no choice." Lucille set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Roman, maybe they're right. Maybe you should." "Don't." The word was sharp enough to make her flinch. Roman immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. But please don't suggest I should reject you. The mate bond isn't something that can be ignored or set aside because it's inconvenient. Even if it costs you your throne?" Lucille challenged. Roman leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "Even then. Though it won't come to that. I'm not without power, Lucille. The territorial governors support me, the packs are loyal, and the royal guard would follow me into hell if I asked. The council can grumble all they want, but ultimately, they serve at my pleasure, not the other way around." His confidence should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Lucille's anxiety spike. I don't want to be the reason for conflict in your kingdom. You're not. Their outdated prejudices are. Roman reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The contact sent the familiar electric tingle through her nerves. Besides, they're wrong about you. How can you know that? You barely know me. I know enough. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, the touch gentle. I know you're brave. You stood on that auction block with your head high despite being terrified. I know you're a good mother. Blake is well-adjusted and happy despite everything you've been through. I know you're strong. Most Omegas would have broken under the pressure you've faced. Lucille shook her head. I'm not strong. I'm just surviving. Survival takes strength, Roman said quietly. More than most people realize. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I want to know you, Lucille. The real you, not just what the mate bond tells me. What you like, what you fear, what you dream about. I want to understand you. The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, admitting he wanted something from her beyond the physical demands of the mate bond. I want that too, she said softly. But I need time. Everything has happened so fast, and She struggled to articulate her feelings. I was married to Jeremiah for 4 years. It wasn't a love match, but we built a life together. And then he made choices that destroyed everything, and I watched him die knowing I was angry at him, and now you're here, and the bond is pulling at me, and I don't know how to feel all of this at once. Roman's hand tightened on hers. Then we take it slow. We get to know each other as people first, mates second. No pressure, no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. And if the council pushes for a formal mating ceremony, they can push all they want. We move at your pace, not theirs. Roman's expression turned wry. Though I should warn you, my wolf is less patient than I am. He wants to claim you, protect you, keep you close. It's taking considerable effort to maintain control. Lucille felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was aware of the claiming process, what it would mean. The thought both terrified and excited her. How long can you maintain control? As long as necessary, Roman said firmly. I'm not some young alpha who can't control his instincts. Though I admit, having you so close and being unable to. He stopped himself, clearing his throat. This conversation is inappropriate for a first proper date. Is that what this is? A date? Roman smiled, and the transformation was startling. The harsh lines of his face softened, making him look younger, more approachable. I'd like it to be, though I'm admittedly rusty at courtship. When was your last date? Lucille asked, genuinely curious. Roman's smile turned rueful. 10 years ago. There was a beta from the Eastern Territories. My advisors thought she'd make a suitable queen. We courted for 6 months before I realized we had absolutely nothing in common beyond our wolves. He shook his head. After that, I stopped trying. Figured I'd either find my true mate or rule alone. That sounds lonely. It was, Roman admitted. But I had responsibilities, a kingdom to run. I told myself that was enough. His eyes met hers, gold flickering in their depths. Then I felt your presence at that auction, and I realized I'd been lying to myself for years. Before Lucille could respond, Blake came running back, his face flushed with excitement. Mama, Papa Roman, can I go on the swings now? Please? Lucille's breath caught at Blake's easy use of Papa Roman, but Roman's entire face lit up. Of course, he said, standing. Let me help you. Lucille watched as Roman followed Blake to the swing set, carefully lifting her son onto the seat and giving him gentle pushes while Blake shrieked with laughter. The sight of this powerful alpha being so tender with her child made something in her chest crack open. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something real. Something lasting, beyond just the mate bond. She was just beginning to relax when a commotion erupted near the garden entrance. Raised voices, the sound of a scuffle, and then a man burst through the garden gate, shaking off the guards who tried to restrain him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his expensive clothes marked with the insignia of a high-ranking pack. And his eyes, when they found Lucille, burned with barely controlled rage. So it's true, he snarled. The great Alpha King has claimed a traitor's whore as his mate. Roman moved so fast he was barely a blur. One moment he was beside Blake. The next he stood between Lucille and the intruder. his wolf fully surfaced and radiating lethal intent. Choose your next words very carefully, Travis, Roman growled, his voice barely human. They may be your last. Chapter 4, Blood and Bonds. Travis Foster stood his ground despite Roman's obvious fury, though Lucille could see the effort it took. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as Roman's power pressed down on him like a physical weight. I speak only the truth. Your Majesty, Travis said, his voice strained. The Pax have a right to know what kind of Omega you've brought into the palace. Her mate was a traitor who conspired to assassinate you. How do we know she wasn't complicit? Roman's growl deepened, and Lucille felt the air itself vibrate with his rage. Behind him, she quickly scooped Blake into her arms, holding him close as he whimpered in fear. Lucille was cleared of any involvement, Roman bit out. The investigation was thorough. She knew nothing of Jeremiah's plans. Convenient, Travis sneered, though his bravado was cracking. Or perhaps the investigators were too distracted by a pretty Omega to see the truth. Roman moved. Lucille barely saw it happen. One moment he stood between her and Travis. The next he had the other alpha by the throat, lifted off his feet, and slammed against the garden wall hard enough to crack the stone. You will apologize, Roman said, his voice deadly calm now, which was somehow more terrifying than his earlier rage. You will apologize to my mate for your insult, and then you will leave this palace and not return until you've learned some basic respect. Travis clawed at Roman's hand, his face turning red. Your Majesty, please, apologize. Roman's claws had extended, pricking the skin of Travis's throat. Small beads of blood welled up where they pressed. Roman, stop. Lucille's voice cut through the tension. She set Blake down near the swing set, telling him firmly to stay there, then crossed to where Roman held Travis. Please. Let him go. Roman's head turned toward her, his eyes still blazing gold. For a moment she thought he wouldn't listen, that his wolf had taken over completely. Then, gradually, the gold faded back to stormy gray. He released Travis, who dropped to his knees gasping. Thank you, Lucille said softly, placing her hand on Roman's arm. The contact seemed to ground him further. Travis struggled to his feet, his hand at his throat. He looked at Lucille with a mixture of fear and reluctant respect. My apologies, Lady Lucille, he rasped. My words were inappropriate. They were cruel, Lucille corrected, surprised by her own steadiness. And wrong. I loved my mate despite his flaws, but I had no knowledge of his conspiracy. I lost everything when his crimes were revealed, my home, my standing, nearly my son. To suggest I was part of it is to suggest I would risk Blake's life for politics. I would never. Something flickered in Travis's expression, perhaps understanding, perhaps merely calculation. He inclined his head stiffly. I spoke in haste. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't, Roman said coldly. And Travis? Spread the word among your pack, and any others who might be curious. Lucille is my mate, and under my protection. The next person who insults her won't receive mercy. Travis nodded quickly and retreated, the guards escorting him out with considerably more success than they'd had preventing his entrance. The moment he was gone, Roman turned to Lucille, his hands coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness given the violence of moments before. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes scanning her face as if checking for injury. I'm fine, she assured him, though her heart was still racing. But Blake. They both turned to where Blake stood, frozen by the swings, his little face pale and his eyes wide. Lucille hurried to him, dropping to her knees and pulling him into her arms. It's okay, sweetheart, she murmured, rocking him gently. Everything's okay now. That man was mean, Blake whispered. He said bad things about you. Some people say bad things when they're afraid, Lucille told him, stroking his hair. But Papa Roman made him leave. We're safe. Roman knelt beside them, his large hand resting gently on Blake's back. I'm sorry you had to see that, son. I lost my temper, and I shouldn't have been so violent in front of you. Blake studied Roman with that serious expression he got sometimes, too old for his years. But you protected Mama. That's what papas do, right? Protect their families? Roman's expression softened. Yes, that's exactly what papas do. He glanced at Lucille over Blake's head, and she saw the question in his eyes. Had he overstepped? Gone too far? She gave him a small nod, and relief washed over his features. How about we get you some of those pastries from lunch? Roman suggested to Blake. I think we could all use something sweet after that unpleasantness. Blake perked up immediately, his resilience once again amazing. The ones with the cream inside? As many as you want, Roman promised. As they walked back to the table, Lucille felt the trembling in her legs she'd been suppressing. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Travis's words had struck at her deepest fears, that she would always be seen as the traitor's widow, that she would bring shame to Roman, that she wasn't worthy of being his mate. Roman must have sensed her distress, because once Blake was settled with pastries, he guided Lucille to a bench partially hidden by flowering vines, giving them some privacy while still being able to see her son. Talk to me, he said quietly. What are you thinking? Lucille was silent for a long moment, watching Blake stuff his face with cream-filled pastries. Finally, she said, he's not wrong, you know, about the Pax having concerns. He is wrong, Roman said firmly. And dangerous. Travis has always been ambitious, always looking for ways to increase his influence. Questioning you was his way of questioning my judgment, hoping to weaken my position. And did it work? Did he weaken your position? Roman considered this. Possibly, but not because his accusations had merit. Because there are wolves in positions of power who would rather see me fail than see the kingdom prosper under a ruler they can't control. He turned to face her fully. The truth is, Lucille, my reign has never been without opposition. Some wolves believe I'm too young, too progressive, too willing to change old traditions. They've been looking for any excuse to challenge me. Our mating just gave them one. So I've made things difficult for you. No, Roman said, his voice intense. They've made things difficult for themselves by refusing to accept that I've found my mate. There's a difference. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I need you to understand something. I didn't claim you despite the political complications. I claimed you because you're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing else matters beyond that fundamental truth. Lucille wanted to believe him. But 4 years with Jeremiah had taught her that politics always mattered, that power and influence could corrupt even the best intentions. What if there's a challenge? She asked quietly. A formal challenge to your rule? Roman's jaw tightened. Then I deal with it. The same way my father dealt with challenges. And his father before him. With strength and strategy and an unwillingness to back down. And if you lose? His eyes flashed gold. I won't. I can't afford to. Not when I have you and Blake to protect now. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I know you're afraid. I know this is all overwhelming and frightening, and probably nothing like what you imagined when you dreamed of having a mate. But I promise you, Lucille, I will keep you safe, no matter what it costs. The fierce devotion in his voice made her chest tight. She wanted to lean into it, to trust him completely. But trust was something that had to be earned, and while Roman had certainly made a strong start, it was still too soon to give him everything. I believe you want to protect us, she said carefully. But I also need to be realistic about what we're facing. I'm not naive, Roman. I know that being your mate makes me a target. Blake too. Which is why I've already assigned additional guards, Roman said. They'll be discreet, but they'll be there. And I've had wards placed on your chamber's ancient magic that will prevent anyone with ill intent from entering. Lucille absorbed this, both grateful and unsettled by the necessity of such measures. You've been planning this. Since the moment I felt our bond, Roman admitted. I knew bringing you here would put you in danger. I've been taking precautions. He hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know. About Jeremiah's conspiracy. Lucille's stomach dropped. What about it? The investigation never fully closed. There were questions about who else might have been involved, whether Jeremiah was working alone or as part of a larger plot. Roman's expression was grave. I have reason to believe Travis is connected to it somehow. Nothing I can prove yet, but my instincts are rarely wrong. You think Travis was part of the conspiracy to kill you? Lucille's voice rose slightly. Then why is he still free? Why haven't you arrested him? Because without proof, arresting a high-ranking alpha would cause more problems than it would solve. It would look like I was eliminating political opponents, and that would give his allies justification to rebel. Roman's frustration was evident. Politics is a game of patience, Lucille. I have to wait for him to make a mistake, reveal himself. And in the meantime, he's free to threaten your mate? Lucille pulled her hand back, suddenly angry. That's unacceptable, Roman. I know. Roman looked pained. Believe me. I know. But my hands are tied unless I want to risk civil war. The best I can do is keep you protected. And watch him carefully. Lucille stood, needing to move, to process this new information. She walked to where Blake sat, checking to make sure he was all right. He'd finished his pastries, and was now playing with a small wooden horse, making it gallop across the table with appropriate sound effects. Roman followed her, giving her space but staying close. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have told you all of this sooner. You had a right to know what you were walking into. Yes, I did, Lucille agreed, still watching Blake. Then she turned to face Roman. But I also understand why you didn't. Yesterday was overwhelming enough without adding political conspiracies to the mix. You're taking this better than I expected. Lucille laughed without humor. What choice do I have? I can't leave. Where would we go? I can't demand you solve this immediately. I'm not stupid enough to think ruling a kingdom is simple. All I can do is accept the situation and try to navigate it as best I can. Roman stepped closer, his presence warm and solid behind her. You're not alone in this. Whatever comes, we face it together. Lucille wanted to believe that. But she'd been alone for so long, had learned to rely only on herself for Blake's safety and well-being. Trusting someone else with that responsibility felt impossible. I need time, she said finally. Time to adjust, to understand the political landscape, to figure out who I can trust. You can trust me, Roman said. Can I? Lucille turned to face him. You're the Alpha King, Roman. Your first loyalty has to be to your kingdom, your Pax. Where do Blake and I fit into that hierarchy? Roman's eyes blazed gold again, his wolf rising. You're my mate. You and Blake are my family. You don't fit into the hierarchy. You're at the top of it, right beside me. Until we become a liability, Lucille challenged. Until keeping us safe threatens your throne. What then? Roman caught her face between his hands, the gesture possessive but gentle. Then I burn the throne and build a new one. You think I care more about power than my mate? You think I'd sacrifice you for politics? His voice dropped to a growl. I would raze this kingdom to the ground before I let anyone hurt you. Do you understand me? You're not negotiable, Lucille. You're not expendable. You're everything. The raw honesty in his words, the fierce devotion in his eyes, finally cracked through Lucille's defenses. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Roman wiped them away with his thumbs. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm so scared, Roman. For Blake, for myself, for you, I've already lost so much. I can't lose again. Roman pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her securely. Lucille let herself lean into his strength, breathing in his scent pine and smoke and safety. You won't, he murmured against her hair. I swear on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, you won't lose again. I'll make sure of it. They stood like that for long minutes, Blake's happy playing sounds the only noise beyond their breathing. Gradually, Lucille felt her fear receding, replaced by something tentative and fragile but undeniably real. Hope. Maybe Roman was right. Maybe together they could face whatever challenges came. Maybe the mate bond wasn't just biology but something stronger, something that could weather political storms and dangerous enemies. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Mama, Papa Roman, Blake called, breaking the moment. Can we go see the horses? Sean said there's a stable with lots and lots of horses. Roman pulled back slightly, smiling down at Lucille. What do you say? Ready for a tour of the royal stables? Lucille nodded, wiping her eyes. That sounds perfect. As they walked toward the stables with Blake skipping ahead, Roman's hand found hers. The touch was simple, comforting. And for the first time since the auction, Lucille allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be okay. She couldn't have known that at that very moment, in a shadowed corner of the palace. Travis Foster was meeting with others who shared his ambitions, or that their plans for dealing with the traitor's whore were already in motion. But ignorance, as they say, is bliss. And for a few precious hours, Lucille allowed herself the luxury of hope. Chapter 5. The Heat Rising. 3 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Lucille gradually found her footing in the palace, learning its rhythms and routines. Sean proved to be more than just a lady's maid. She became a friend, teaching Lucille the complex etiquette of court life and gossiping cheerfully about palace politics. Blake thrived in his new environment. He'd made friends with the stable master's grandson, a boy of 5 named Guy, and the two of them could often be found playing in the gardens or watching the guards train. Roman had been true to his word about claiming Blake as his son, and the little boy now called him Papa without hesitation. As for Roman himself, he courted Lucille with a patience that surprised her. Flowers appeared in her room each morning. He joined her and Blake for meals whenever his schedule allowed. He taught her to ride properly, his hands steady at her waist as he helped her mount. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, gradually peeling back layers to reveal the people beneath their titles and circumstances. Lucille found herself falling for him in ways that had nothing to do with the mate bond. She loved his dry sense of humor, the way he listened intently when she spoke, how gentle he was with Blake despite his fearsome reputation. She loved watching him work, the way he commanded respect from his advisors, his strategic mind solving problems that seemed impossible. But she also saw the weight he carried, the long hours, the difficult decisions, the constant pressure of ruling. More than once she'd found him in his study late at night, surrounded by reports and correspondence, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Tonight was one of those nights. Lucille had put Blake to bed an hour ago and was preparing for sleep herself when she heard movement from Roman's chambers through the connecting door. She hesitated, her hand on the lock. They'd maintained the barrier between their rooms, respecting the boundaries they'd set. But something pulled at her. Not just the mate bond, but genuine concern. She unlocked the door and knocked softly. "Come in," Roman's voice called, rough with fatigue. She found him at his desk, still fully dressed despite the late hour. Papers covered every surface, and he was rubbing his temples as if fighting off a headache. "You should be sleeping," Lucille said, entering cautiously. Roman looked up, and despite his obvious exhaustion, warmth flooded his eyes at the sight of her. "I could say the same to you. I couldn't sleep knowing you were still working." She crossed to him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "What's wrong?" Roman leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "Border disputes in the Western Territories, supply shortages in the North, and the Council has requested another meeting to discuss concerns about recent developments." His tone made it clear what those developments were. Standard problems, but they all require attention. Lucille moved behind him, hesitating only briefly before placing her hands on his shoulders. Roman went still beneath her touch. "May I?" she asked softly. "Please," he breathed. She began to knead the knotted muscles, feeling him gradually relax under her ministrations. They were quiet for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Roman's occasional sighs of relief. "You do too much," Lucille said finally. "You can't solve every problem personally. They're my responsibility, my packs, my kingdom. Your burden doesn't have to be yours alone." She worked at a particularly stubborn knot near his neck. "You have advisors, governors, people who could help if you'd let them." Roman caught one of her hands, bringing it to his lips. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just haven't been paying attention." The teasing tone was new between them, a sign of growing comfort. Roman tugged gently, pulling her around until she stood between his knees. His hands settled at her waist, his touch warm even through the silk of her nightgown and robe. "I pay attention to everything about you," he said, his voice dropping lower. "The way you bite your lip when you're thinking, how you hum while you're arranging flowers, the sound of your laugh when Blake does something silly." His thumbs traced small circles at her waist. "I notice it all, Lucille." Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her limbs. She was acutely aware of how close they were, how his scent surrounded her, how the mate bond was pulling taut between them like a vibrating string. "Roman," she whispered, not sure if she was protesting or encouraging. He stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Tell me to stop and I will. Tell me to go back to maintaining this respectful distance, and I'll do it." "But Lucille," his hand came up to cup her cheek, "I need you to know that holding back from you is the hardest thing I've ever done." "Why do you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Hold back, I mean. The mate bond most alphas would have claimed their omegas by now. Because you deserve more than being claimed out of biological necessity, Roman said fiercely. You deserve to be courted, to be certain of your feelings before we take that step. You deserve choice, Lucille. Real choice, not just instinct. His consideration, his patience, his absolute respect for her autonomy. It broke something open inside her. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Roman froze for a heartbeat, then responded with a hunger that stole her breath. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him as he deepened the kiss. Lucille's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on a sensation overwhelmed her. This was different from the chaste kisses they'd shared before. This was need and want and 3 weeks of suppressed desire finally given permission to surface. Roman's wolf was close, she could feel it in the way his grip tightened possessively. The low growl that rumbled in his chest. The flash of gold when she pulled back to breathe. Lucille, he rasped, his control clearly hanging by a thread. If we don't stop now. I don't want to stop, she said, surprised by her own boldness. I want. She struggled to articulate feelings that were both primal and deeply personal. I want you, Roman. Not just because of the bond, but because of who you are. Because you're patient and kind and you make Blake laugh. Because you work yourself to exhaustion trying to protect everyone. Because when you look at me, I feel like I matter. Roman's eyes blazed gold. You do matter. You're everything. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation from either of them. Roman lifted her easily, carrying her toward his bed. Lucille's heart raced, want and nervousness warring inside her. They were almost there when the sensation hit. It started as warmth in her lower abdomen, then spread rapidly through her entire body. Lucille gasped, her skin suddenly too sensitive, too hot. The scent of her arousal filled the air, sweet and intoxicating and unmistakably omega. Roman stopped dead, his nostrils flaring. No, he breathed. Not yet. It's too soon. But Lucille knew what was happening. She'd felt it twice before, though not in years, not since Blake's birth. Her heat was coming. How long? Roman demanded, setting her carefully on her feet though his hands remained at her waist, steadying her. How long before it fully hits? Lucille's mind felt fuzzy, her wolf rising eagerly at the prospect of being claimed by her mate. Maybe an hour? Sometimes less. Roman cursed, backing away from her despite the obvious effort it cost him. You need to go back to your rooms. Lock the door. I'll have Sean bring you water and supplies. Roman. No. The word was almost a growl. I won't claim you like this. When you're not fully in control. When your heat makes you want things you might regret later. Lucille wanted to argue, to tell him she wouldn't regret anything. But already her thoughts were growing hazy, her body responding to the biological imperative of her cycle. And beneath the heat, beneath the want, a small voice whispered that he was right there first claiming should be a choice, not a compulsion. Okay, she managed. But Roman, you need to leave the palace. Your rut will trigger in response to your heat, he finished grimly. I know. I'm already feeling it. He was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'll go to the Northern Lodge. It's far enough that the distance should help. A whimper escaped Lucille at the thought of him leaving. Her omega instincts screamed against separation from her mate during her heat. Roman made a pained sound. Don't. Please don't make those sounds. It's taking everything I have not to. He cut himself off. Go, Lucille. Now. Before I lose what little control I have left. Lucille fled to her rooms, slamming the connecting door and locking it with shaking hands. She could hear Roman moving on the other side. The sound of drawers opening, hurried footsteps. Then his voice, calling for guards, issuing orders. Sean appeared minutes later, her face flushed and worried. His Majesty sent word, she said, setting down a basket of supplies, water, cooling cloths, a tonic that would help manage the worst symptoms. He's already left for the lodge. Are you all right, miss? I will be, Lucille said, though she wasn't certain. Her skin felt like it was on fire, and every instinct demanded she go after Roman. Find him, complete the bond. Blake is sound asleep and will be watched over, Sean assured her. I'll sleep in his room tonight. You focus on getting through this. The heat hit fully an hour later. Lucille had experienced it before, but never like this, never with a true mate nearby. Close enough that his scent still lingered in her borrowed room. Her body ached with emptiness, with the need to be filled, claimed, marked. She buried her face in the pillow from Roman's bed that Sean had thoughtfully brought her, breathing in his scent. It helped and hurt at the same time, easing her wolf while making her human side ache with loneliness. At the Northern Lodge, Roman was faring no better. His rut had hit the moment he'd put distance between himself and Lucille, and now he paced the small cabin like a caged animal. His wolf howled inside him, demanding he return to their mate, claim her, complete the bond. It took every ounce of his considerable willpower to stay away. The next 3 days were torture for both of them. Lucille's heat burned through her in waves, leaving her weak and disoriented. Between the worst of it, she worried about Blake, about Roman, about the vulnerability of being incapacitated, while political enemies circled. Roman's rut was equally brutal. He destroyed most of the furniture in the lodge, his wolf too close to the surface to allow for fine motor control. The royal guards stationed outside gave him a wide berth, recognizing the danger of approaching an alpha in rut. But they both survived. On the 4th day, Lucille woke clear-headed for the first time, her heat finally burned out. She was exhausted and sore, but herself again. And Roman returned to the palace that evening with dark circles under his eyes and an intensity in his gaze that made Lucille's breath catch. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, finding her in the gardens where she'd gone to breathe fresh air after days confined to her rooms. "About what happens next." Lucille nodded, steeling herself for a conversation she knew they couldn't avoid any longer. Chapter 6. Claiming What's Mine. Roman looked like he'd been through a war. His jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of beard. His hair was disheveled, and there was a wildness in his eyes that hadn't fully receded. But he was here, and the sight of him made Lucille's heart skip. "Are you all right?" she asked, resisting the urge to touch him, to check for injuries even though she knew the only wounds were internal. "I am now," Roman said roughly. "You?" "Better. Tired, but better." She gestured to the bench beneath the willow tree. "Should we sit?" They settled side by side, careful to maintain a small distance. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now after the shared ordeal of heat and rut. "That was harder than I expected," Roman admitted. "My wolf." He stopped, seeming to search for words. "He wanted to come back. Every instinct screamed at me to return to you, to claim you despite everything I'd promised. But you didn't," Lucille said softly. "You kept your word." Roman turned to face her fully. "Because you're worth waiting for. Because consent matters more than instinct." He paused. "But Lucille, we need to address the reality of what we're dealing with. Your heats will trigger my ruts. My ruts will trigger your heats. The cycles will only get more intense the longer we resist the bond." Lucille knew he was right. She'd felt it during her heat, the wrongness of being without her mate, the physical pain of incomplete bonding. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking." Roman took her hand, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his gaze. "I want to complete the bond, Lucille. I want to claim you as my mate and let you claim me in return. But only if that's what you want too. Not because of biology or duty or political necessity. Because you choose it. Choose me." Lucille's chest tightened. 3 weeks ago she'd been terrified of this man, uncertain whether his protection was genuine or just another form of possession. But he'd proven himself again and again, his patience, his respect, his genuine care for her and Blake. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of making another mistake. Of trusting the wrong person again." "I'm not Jeremiah," Roman said quietly. "I know you need to hear that. I know you're carrying scars from that relationship, from the way he let you down. But I'm not him, Lucille. I won't gamble away our security. I won't make promises I can't keep. And I will never, ever put you in a position where you and Blake are vulnerable to my mistakes." Tears pricked Lucille's eyes. "How can you be so certain? How do you know you won't disappoint me?" "Because disappointing you would destroy me," Roman said simply. "Because you're not just my mate, you're my purpose. The reason I get up in the morning, the reason I fight so hard to keep this kingdom stable, everything I do knowing that I'm building a safe world for you and Blake." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "And if I ever do disappoint you, If I ever fail you, I need you to tell me. Hold me accountable. Don't let me become complacent or take you for granted." The vulnerability in his words, the absolute sincerity, finally broke through Lucille's remaining walls. She'd been looking for guarantees, for certainty, in an uncertain world. But maybe love wasn't about guarantees. Maybe it was about choosing to trust, to risk, to believe that together they could face whatever came. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you, Roman. I want to complete the bond." The relief and joy that washed over his face was devastating in its intensity. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you for trusting me with this. With you." They held each other for a long moment, the decision made, the path forward clear. Then Roman pulled back, his expression turning serious. "There's something you need to understand about the claiming," he said. "The bite when I mark you, it will forge a permanent connection between us. You'll be able to feel my emotions, sense when I'm in danger. And I'll feel yours. There's no breaking it, Lucille. Once it's done, we're bound for life." "I know," Lucille said. "And I'll mark you too. Equal partnership, remember?" Roman's eyes flashed gold. "Yes," he growled, the sound making her shiver. "I want your mark on me. Want everyone to know I belong to you as much as you belong to me." The possessiveness in his voice sent heat coursing through her. "When?" she asked. "When do we do this?" "Tonight, if you're willing. There's a full moon traditional for bonding ceremonies, though we don't need witnesses for the claiming itself." He hesitated. "Though I should warn you, the council will expect a formal ceremony eventually, a public claiming to legitimize our bond in their eyes." Lucille frowned. "I thought the mate bond superseded their politics." "It does. But they'll still want the spectacle, the ritual. It's a way of asserting control, of forcing us to acknowledge their authority." Roman's jaw tightened. "We can deal with that later, though. The important thing is the private claiming. That's what makes us truly mated." "Then yes," Lucille said, her decision made. "Tonight." The hours between that conversation and nightfall felt eternal. Lucille bathed and dressed with Sean's help, choosing a simple white gown that felt appropriate for the significance of the occasion. Sean chattered nervously about bonding traditions and what to expect, but Lucille barely heard her. Her mind was focused on what was coming, on the permanent commitment she was about to make. Blake had been told that Mama and Papa Roman were having a special grown-up night, and seemed content to spend the evening with Guy and the stable master's family. He'd hugged Lucille tightly before she left, whispering, "I love you, Mama," in her ear. "I love you too, sweetheart," she'd whispered back. More than anything, now she stood in Roman's chambers, truly entered them for the first time, and took in her surroundings. The room was masculine but not stark, decorated in deep blues and grays. A massive bed dominated one wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens. Candles had been lit throughout the space, casting everything in warm, flickering light. Roman emerged from his bathing room wearing only loose trousers, his chest bare. Lucille's breath caught at the sight of him, all lean muscle and golden skin, marked here and there with scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. "You're beautiful," he said, his eyes traveling over her with undisguised appreciation. "I don't think I've told you that enough. How absolutely stunning you are." Lucille felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're not so bad yourself." Roman smiled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But in a good way, I think." "Me too." The confession surprised her. "I've waited so long for this, for you. I'm afraid of disappointing you, of not being everything you need." Lucille reached up to cup his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble beneath her palm. "You already are everything I need. You just have to keep being yourself." Roman turned his head to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Then slowly he backed toward the bed, drawing her with him. "We take this at your pace," he said. "If anything feels wrong or too fast, you tell me, promise me." "I promise," Lucille whispered. What followed was a gradual revelation of trust and desire. Roman undressed her with reverent care, his hands and lips mapping every inch of newly exposed skin. Lucille explored him in turn, fascinated by the play of muscle beneath skin, the way he shuddered when she touched certain places. When they finally came together, it was with a rightness that went beyond physical pleasure. The mate bond flared between them, golden and brilliant, weaving their souls together in ways that made it impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And when Roman's canines extended and he struck, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, Lucille cried out not in pain but in completion. The mark burned and then soothed, and suddenly she could feel him inside her mind, his emotions cascading over her in waves. Love, possession, joy, relief. It was overwhelming and perfect. "Your turn," Roman gasped, tilting his head to expose his throat, in a show of absolute trust and submission. Lucille's own canines had extended, her omega instincts driving her to complete the bond. She bit down on the same spot on his neck, tasting copper and something indefinably him. Roman groaned, his arms tightening around her as their bond sealed completely. When it was done, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard. Lucille could feel Roman in her mind like a second heartbeat, steady, strong, absolutely hers. "How do you feel?" Roman asked, his fingers tracing the mark he'd left on her neck. "Complete," Lucille said simply, "like I've been missing a piece of myself and just found it." Roman smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's exactly how I feel." He pulled her closer, and she settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you, Lucille. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Because they were true. Somewhere between the auction and tonight, between fear and trust, she'd fallen completely in love with the Alpha King. They lay together as the moon rose higher, talking softly about everything and nothing. Roman told her about his childhood, about the pressure of being groomed for kingship from birth. Lucille shared memories of her own upbringing, of parents she'd lost to illness before meeting Jeremiah. Eventually exhaustion claimed them both, and they drifted into sleep still wrapped in each other's arms, their bond humming contentedly between them. Neither of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the garden below Roman's windows. Neither saw Travis Foster smile coldly as he watched the candles finally extinguish in the king's chambers. "So it's done," he murmured to himself. "The king has finally claimed his traitor's whore." His hand moved to the communication crystal in his pocket, already composing the message he would send to his co-conspirators. Now we move to the next phase. In the darkness, his eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. The Alpha King thought he was building a family, securing his happiness. He had no idea he'd just made himself more vulnerable than ever. And Travis Foster intended to exploit that vulnerability for everything it was worth. Dawn broke with golden light streaming through the windows. Lucille woke slowly, pleasantly sore and more content than she could remember feeling. Roman was already awake, propped on one elbow and watching her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Good morning, mate," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, reaching up to touch the mark on his neck, her mark. "How long have you been awake?" "An hour or so." "I didn't want to wake you. You looked so peaceful." His hand moved to the corresponding mark on her neck, and she felt an echo of sensation through their bond. His satisfaction, his possessive pleasure. "How do you feel?" "Perfect," Lucille said honestly. "Though I suppose we should probably get up. Blake will be wondering where we are." Roman groaned. 5 more minutes. "I'm not ready to share you with the world yet." Lucille laughed, but she understood the sentiment. This cocoon they'd created felt safe, separate from politics and threats and responsibilities. She wished they could stay here forever. But reality couldn't be held at bay forever. A sharp knock at the door broke through their peace. "Your Majesty," came a guard's urgent voice. "Apologies for the interruption, but there's been an incident. The council demands your immediate presence." Roman's expression darkened. He rose from bed, already pulling on clothes. "What kind of incident?" "An attack, Your Majesty. On the eastern border. Multiple casualties. They're saying it was coordinated." Lucille sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest as fear lanced through her. Roman felt it through their bond and crossed back to the bed, kissing her quickly. "It's probably nothing," he said, though his eyes told her he didn't believe that. "Stay here, I'll handle this and come back as soon as I can." But as Roman strode from the room, Lucille couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. And in her mind, She heard Blake's voice from yesterday. I love you, Mama. She should have told him she'd always protect him. She should have known that happiness was never guaranteed. Chapter 7. Blood in the water. Lucille dressed quickly, her hands trembling as she fastened the buttons on her gown. Through the bond, she could feel Roman's anger growing, mixed with something darker concern, maybe even fear. Whatever news he was receiving from the council, it wasn't good. She was just reaching for the door when Sean burst in, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. Miss Lady Lucille, you need to come quickly, it's Blake. Lucille's heart stopped. What about Blake? What happened? He's fine, Sean said quickly, seeing the terror on Lucille's face. He's safe, I promise. But there was an attempt. Someone tried to take him from the stables this morning. The guards stopped them, but Lucille was already running. She flew through the corridors, her bare feet slapping against marble floors, not caring about propriety or appearance. Blake. Someone had tried to take Blake. She burst into the royal nursery, a room Roman had prepared, but they hadn't yet used, to find her son sitting on a plush rug surrounded by toys, seemingly unharmed. Relief crashed over her so powerfully she nearly collapsed. Blake. She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms and holding him so tightly he squeaked in protest. Mama. You're squishing me, he complained, but his little arms wrapped around her neck just as tightly. I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. Lucille pulled back just enough to check him over. No injuries, no signs of trauma. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine, Blake said, his expression more confused than frightened. The guards made me come inside really fast, and they wouldn't let me see Guy. What's happening, Mama? Before Lucille could answer, Roman appeared in the doorway. His presence filled the room, power crackling around him like lightning. But when his eyes found Blake and Lucille, some of the fury in his expression eased. Thank the goddess, he breathed, crossing to them and dropping to one knee. When I heard, he stopped, his jaw working as he struggled with emotion. Then he pulled both of them into his arms, holding them like he'd never let go. Through their bond, Lucille felt the absolute terror that had gripped him when he'd learned of the attempt. The primal fear of losing them. The murderous rage toward whoever had dared threaten his family. What happened? She asked quietly over Blake's head. Not here, Roman said. He stood, lifting Blake easily. Let's go somewhere more private. He led them to a small sitting room adjacent to the nursery, waving away the guards who tried to follow. Once the door was closed, he set Blake down on a sofa and knelt before him. Blake, I need you to tell me exactly what happened this morning. Can you do that? Blake nodded solemnly, seeming to understand the seriousness of the situation. I was in the stables with Guy. We were brushing the horses like Mr. Bobby taught us. Then a man came in. I didn't know him. He said he had a message for me from you. Roman's expression darkened. What did he say? He said you wanted to see me right away. That it was important. Blake's brow furrowed. But then the guards came running, and they yelled at the man. And he ran away. The guards made me come inside really fast. They seemed scared. You did everything right, Roman assured him, ruffing his hair. The guards were protecting you, just like they're supposed to. And you were smart not to go with the stranger. Was he a bad man? Blake asked. Yes, Roman said simply. A very bad man who wanted to hurt our family. Lucille's hands clenched into fists. Who was it? Did the guards catch him? Roman stood, his face like granite. No, he had an escape route planned. But we found this on him. He dropped it when he fled. He pulled a small object from his pocket and held it up. It was a medallion, silver and engraved with a crest Lucille didn't recognize. But Roman's reaction told her he knew it well. That's Travis Foster's family crest, she said, remembering the man who'd confronted them in the garden weeks ago. Yes. Roman's voice was deadly calm. Which means this wasn't a random attack. It was coordinated, probably timed to coincide with the border incident to divide my attention. The border attack, was that fake too? No, that was real. 6 guards dead, 2 villages burned. Roman's hands clenched. Travis has been busy. Create chaos on the borders, then strike at my family while I'm distracted dealing with it. It's a classic tactic. Lucille felt sick. What do we do? Now? Now I end this. Roman's eyes flashed gold. I've been patient, playing by the council's rules, waiting for proof. Well, this is proof. Travis Foster just declared war on the crown. He crossed to the door and barked orders to the waiting guards. Assemble the royal guard. Issue an arrest warrant for Travis Foster and anyone associated with his house. I want every rat in this conspiracy dragged into the light. As guards scattered to carry out his commands, Roman returned to Lucille and Blake, his expression softened slightly as he looked at them. I need to deal with this personally, he said. But I won't leave you unprotected. I'm assigning my personal guard to you, Bobby Cherry. He's the best warrior I have. Absolutely loyal. No one gets past him. I want to help, Lucille said. Tell me what I can do. Roman cupped her face in his hands. Keep Blake safe. That's the most important thing you can do. Travis targeted him for a reason to hurt me through you. To show that I can't protect my own family. Don't give him that satisfaction. But Roman, please. The single word held so much emotion, fear, determination, love. Please, Lucille. I can't fight this battle if I'm worried about you. I need to know you're safe. Lucille wanted to argue, to insist she was more than capable of defending herself. But she looked at Blake, saw how he was trying to be brave despite his confusion and fear, and knew Roman was right. Her first priority had to be protecting her son. Okay, she agreed. But you have to promise me something. Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't let your anger make you reckless. We need you to come back to us. Roman pulled her close, pressing a fierce kiss to her lips. I will, I swear it. He pulled back, his eyes meeting hers. I love you, both of you, remember that. We love you too, Lucille whispered. Be careful. Roman knelt one more time before Blake. Remember what I told you about being brave? Blake nodded. You said being brave means being scared but doing the right thing anyway. Exactly. Right now, the right thing is staying with your mama and doing what the guards tell you. Can you do that for me? Yes, Papa Roman, Blake said solemnly. I'll protect Mama. Roman smiled despite the gravity of the situation. I know you will, son. You're already a better man than most. Then, he was gone, striding from the room with purpose, and barely controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. Lucille felt his determination through their bond, mixed with that same underlying fear that something could go wrong, that he might fail to protect them. She'd barely had time to process his departure when Bobby Cherry appeared in the doorway. He was a grizzled beta wolf, probably in his 50s, with scars crisscrossing his arms and a no-nonsense expression that immediately put Lucille at ease. Lady Lucille, he said, bowing slightly. His Majesty has placed you and young Blake under my personal protection. With your permission, I'd like to move you to more secure quarters until this situation is resolved. Where? Lucille asked. The old tower in the eastern wing. It was built as a defensive position, only one entrance, reinforced walls, clear sightlines. His Majesty's mother used it as a safe room during the last rebellion. Bobby's expression was grave. I won't lie to you, my lady. If they come for you, that tower is the most defensible position in the palace. The casual mention of "if they come" sent ice through Lucille's veins, but she forced herself to stay calm for Blake's sake. Very well, let's go. The tower was exactly as Bobby had described, a circular stone room at the top of a narrow staircase, with arrow slits for windows and a heavy door that could be barred from inside. It was sparse but functional, with a bed, some chairs, and supplies that included food, water, and weapons. How long will we need to stay here? Lucille asked, as Bobby checked the door mechanism. Until His Majesty gives the all clear. Could be hours, could be days. Bobby turned to face her. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you became the king's mate, but Travis Foster is desperate, and desperate wolves are unpredictable. His Majesty won't rest until every threat is eliminated. Lucille nodded, settling on the bed with Blake curled against her side. Through the bond, she could feel Roman moving through the palace, his emotions a storm of rage and calculation. He was hunting, and she pitied anyone who got in his way. Hours passed. Blake eventually fell asleep, exhausted by the stress of the morning. Lucille sat awake, one hand stroking her son's hair, while the other rested on the mark at her neck. Roman's mark, proof of their bond. Be safe. She sent through the connection, not sure if he could hear her thoughts but needing to say it anyway. Come back to us. She felt a pulse of warmth in response, acknowledgement, reassurance, love. Roman was alive and fighting. That would have to be enough. As night fell, Bobby brought them a simple dinner and news. His Majesty has Travis Foster's estate surrounded. The man barricaded himself inside with about 20 supporters. It's a standoff. Will there be bloodshed? Lucille asked quietly. Bobby's expression was grim. His Majesty gave them one chance to surrender. They refused. So yes, my lady, there will be blood. Lucille closed her eyes, sending up a prayer to the moon goddess, that Roman would emerge victorious and unharmed. She'd just found him, just completed their bond. She couldn't lose him now. More hours passed. The moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light through the narrow windows. Blake stirred in his sleep, whimpering softly, and Lucille hummed a lullaby her mother had sung to her long ago. Then, suddenly, pain lanced through her chest, not her pain but Roman's, transmitted through their bond. Lucille gasped, clutching at her heart. My lady. Bobby was at her side immediately. What's wrong? Roman, she managed. Something's happened to Roman. Through the bond she felt his shock, his fury, and then nothing, a terrifying emptiness where his presence should be. No, Lucille whispered, tears streaming down her face. No, no, no. Bobby was already at the door, calling for runners, demanding information, but Lucille barely heard him. All she could focus on was the silence in her mind where Roman's voice should be. Had she just lost her mate mere hours after claiming him? Had Blake lost the father he'd just begun to love? Lucille pulled her son closer, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Chapter 8. The Alpha King's Fury. The emptiness in Lucille's mind lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Then gradually she felt Roman's presence return, weak and fractured, but there. He was alive. Relief nearly knocked her over. She clutched the edge of the bed, breathing hard, feeling tears stream down her face. He's alive, she gasped to Bobby, who was still barking orders at guards in the stairwell. I can feel him. He's hurt, but alive. Bobby's expression shifted from concern to grim determination. Then we hold this position until he returns or sends word. No one gets through that door. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Through the bond, Lucille could feel Roman's pain, sharp and insistent, but also his fury. Whatever had happened hadn't broken him. It had only made him more dangerous. Finally, near midnight, running footsteps echoed up the tower stairs. Bobby drew his weapon, positioning himself between Lucille and the door. But the voice that called out was familiar. It's Sean. Please, let me in. I have news from His Majesty. Bobby cracked the door open, weapon still raised, then lowered it when he confirmed it was indeed the young maid. Sean stumbled in, breathless and pale. His Majesty sent me, she panted. He's at the healer's wing. He was wounded in the assault on Foster's estate, but he's stable. He wanted you to know immediately. She looked at Lucille with something like awe. They say he fought like a demon, my lady. Took down 15 wolves single-handedly before one managed to get a blade between his ribs. Lucille was already moving toward the door. I need to see him. My lady, it's not safe, Bobby started. I don't care. Lucille's voice was sharp with barely controlled panic. My mate is injured. I'm going to him. You can either escort me or get out of my way. Bobby studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But the boy stays here with Sean. I won't risk both of you. Lucille looked back at Blake, still sleeping peacefully, and made the hardest decision of her life. All right. Sean, watch him. Don't let anyone near him. With my life, my lady, Sean promised. The journey to the healer's wing felt interminable. Bobby kept them to back corridors, avoiding the main halls where chaos still reigned. Lucille could hear shouting, the clatter of armor, wolves running on urgent missions throughout the palace. Through the bond, she felt Roman's awareness of her approach. His emotions were complex: relief at knowing she was safe, concern that she'd left the tower, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that worried her more than the physical pain. They reached the healer's wing to find it heavily guarded. The wolves on duty immediately bowed when they saw Lucille, stepping aside to let her pass. Inside, The smell of blood and healing herbs hung thick in the air. A healer, an elderly Omega woman named Helene Wilcox, looked up as Lucille entered. "Lady Lucille. His Majesty is in the private chamber. I've done what I can, but—" She hesitated. "He refused sedation until he saw you." Lucille's heart clenched. She hurried to the private chamber, pushing through the door to find Roman sitting on the edge of a bed, his torso wrapped in bandages that were already staining red. His face was pale beneath the dirt and blood, and there was a vicious cut across his left cheekbone that would definitely scar. But his eyes, those stormy gray eyes, lit up the moment he saw her. "Lucille," he breathed. She crossed to him in 3 strides, her hands hovering over his injuries, afraid to touch him and cause more pain. "You idiot," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You absolute idiot. I felt you disappear through the bond. I thought, I'm sorry." Roman's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly steady. The blade had wolfsbane on it. "It severed our connection temporarily while my body fought off the poison." "Wolfsbane?" Lucille's blood ran cold. Wolfsbane was deadly to their kind, capable of killing within hours if not treated. "Roman, you could have died, but I didn't." He pulled her closer, mindful of his injuries. "I had too much to live for. You and Blake. You're my reason for fighting, for surviving." Lucille buried her face against his shoulder, careful to avoid his bandaged torso, and let herself cry. All the fear, the terror, the absolute helplessness of the last 12 hours poured out of her. Roman held her through it, murmuring soft reassurances, his hand stroking her hair. "Is it over?" she finally asked, pulling back to look at him. "Did you get Travis?" Roman's expression hardened. "He's dead. Killed himself rather than be taken alive. But before he died, he confirmed what I suspected: there are others involved. Members of the council, territorial leaders, maybe even some of the royal guard." His jaw clenched. "This conspiracy goes deeper than I thought." "Then you're still in danger." "We're still in danger," Roman corrected. "Travis's attempt on Blake proves they're willing to target you to get to me. Which means we need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" Roman was silent for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "I'm calling a formal gathering of all the territorial packs. Every alpha, every council member, every wolf with any claim to power. They'll come to the palace, and I'll make it clear publicly, undeniably clear, that you are my mate and queen. That Blake is my heir. That anyone who threatens my family threatens the crown itself." "A public claiming ceremony," Lucille said, remembering what he'd mentioned before. "More than that. A declaration of war against anyone who would undermine our bond." Roman's eyes flashed gold. "I've been patient. I've played politics. I've tried to maintain peace and stability. But they've gone after my family, Lucille. They've tried to take my son. There will be consequences." The fierce protectiveness in his voice, the absolute certainty, should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since this nightmare began. "When?" she asked. 3 days. That's how long it will take for the distant territories to arrive." Roman grimaced as he shifted position, his injuries clearly paining him. "And before you ask, yes, I'll be healed enough by then. Alpha healing is fast, and the wolfsbane is already purged from my system." Lucille wanted to argue, to insist he rest longer. But she could see the determination in his eyes, and knew it would be pointless. Roman had made his decision. "There's something else," Roman said quietly. "Something I need to tell you before the ceremony." "What?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in the gesture she'd come to recognize as a comfort to him. "The formal claiming ceremony, it's not just symbolic. There's a ritual component, ancient magic that was woven into the crown itself generations ago. When we complete it, you won't just be my mate. You'll be bound to the kingdom itself, to the land and the magic that sustains it." Lucille frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you'll have power," Roman explained. "Real power, beyond just being queen. You'll be able to sense threats to the kingdom, to feel the health of the land, to wield some of the crown's authority independently of me." He paused. "It also means that if I die, you don't just become a widow. You become the ruling alpha until Blake comes of age." The weight of what he was describing settled over Lucille like a physical thing. She'd accepted becoming Roman's mate, even accepted the political implications of being queen. But this was something else entirely. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted. No one's ever ready for it, Roman said. My mother certainly wasn't. But she rose to the occasion, and so will you. His expression softened. I have complete faith in you, Lucille. You're stronger than you think. Before Lucille could respond, Helene returned with fresh bandages and a stern expression. Your Majesty, you need to rest, and Lady Lucille, you should return to your son. I'm sure he'll be frightened when he wakes. Roman nodded reluctantly. She's right. Go to Blake. I'll join you as soon as the healers release me. Lucille leaned down to kiss him gently, mindful of his injuries. I love you. Please rest. I love you too, Roman murmured against her lips. More than my own life. Bobby escorted her back to the tower, where Blake was indeed awake and asking for her. Lucille spent the rest of the night holding her son, telling him that Papa Roman was safe, that everything would be all right. She hoped desperately that she wasn't lying. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Messengers rode out to every corner of the kingdom, carrying the Alpha King's summons. Servants cleaned and prepared guest quarters for the hundreds of wolves who would be descending on the palace. The council convened in emergency sessions, their voices rising in heated debate behind closed doors. And Lucille was fitted for a gown that took her breath away. It was made of midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer in the light, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that depicted wolves and moons and ancient symbols she didn't recognize. It's the Queen's ceremonial gown, Sean explained as seamstresses pinned and adjusted. It's been worn by every queen at her claiming ceremony for 7 generations. They've altered it to fit you perfectly. Lucille stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the regal figure looking back at her. Just weeks ago, she'd been on an auction block in rags, terrified and helpless. Now, she was about to become queen. The transformation felt impossible, like a fever dream she might wake from at any moment. Roman had been released from the healer's wing the morning after his injury, his alpha healing already mending the worst of the damage. He spent his days in meetings, coordinating security for the gathering and rooting out the remaining conspirators in Travis's network. 6 council members had been arrested, along with 2 territorial governors and a dozen minor nobles. The purge was brutal but necessary. Roman showed no mercy to those who'd betrayed the crown. The night before the ceremony, Roman came to Lucille's chambers properly this time, through the main door rather than their private connecting passage. He wore formal robes and carried a small velvet box. I have something for you, he said after Blake had been put to bed. Something that belonged to my mother. He opened the box to reveal a circlet of silver and sapphires, delicate yet unmistakably powerful. It's the Queen's crown. She wore it at her own claiming ceremony, and her mother before her. I want you to wear it tomorrow. Lucille's hands trembled as she reached for it. Roman. You're going to be magnificent, he interrupted gently. I know you're frightened. I know this is overwhelming. But tomorrow, when you stand before the Pax and accept the Queen's crown, you're not just claiming your place as my mate. You're claiming your place as a ruler, as a leader, as someone worthy of respect and allegiance. What if I fail? The fear she'd been suppressing for days finally broke through. What if I'm not strong enough? Roman set down the crown and pulled her into his arms. Then I'll be there to catch you. We're partners, Lucille, equals. You don't have to carry this burden alone. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in his scent pine and smoke and home. I'm terrified. Good, Roman said. Fear keeps us sharp. Just don't let it control you. They stood like that for long minutes, drawing strength from each other. Finally, Lucille pulled back. All right, she said, squaring her shoulders. Tomorrow I become queen. Tonight I'm just your mate. Can we just be Roman and Lucille for a few more hours? Roman smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. I can't think of anything I'd like more. They spent the evening simply being together, talking, laughing, making love with a tenderness that spoke of their deep connection. And when dawn came, Lucille rose to face her destiny with her mate at her side and her son's hand in hers. The claiming ceremony would change everything. She could only hope it would be for the better. Chapter 9. The Queen's Crown. The throne room had been transformed overnight. Hundreds of candles cast flickering light across ancient stone walls, and the scent of ritual herbs, sage, lavender, and something sharper that Lucille didn't recognize hung thick in the air. Every territorial alpha, every council member, every wolf of significance in the Northern Territories had gathered, filling the massive space until it felt close and stifling. Lucille stood in an antechamber off the main hall, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror. The midnight blue gown fit her perfectly, hugging her curves before flowing out in a cascade of shimmering silk. Her hair had been swept up in an elaborate style, woven with silver thread and small sapphires. The queen's crown sat on a velvet cushion beside her, waiting. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. "Mama, you look like a princess from my storybook," Blake said, his voice full of wonder. He was dressed in miniature formal, wearing a tiny jacket and trousers that made him look heartbreakingly grown up. Lucille knelt carefully, mindful of the gown, and cupped his face. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready for this?" Blake nodded seriously. "Papa Roman said I have to be brave today, that lots of people will be watching, and I need to show them that I'm strong like him." Pride and love swelled in Lucille's chest. "You're already strong, Blake. The strongest little boy I know." A knock at the door preceded Sean's entrance. "My lady, it's time. His Majesty is waiting." Lucille stood, took a deep breath, and lifted her chin. She could do this. She had to do this for Blake, for Roman, for the future they were building together. The processional doors opened, and the assembled crowd fell silent. Lucille stepped into the throne room with Blake at her side, and every eye turned to watch. The walk to the dais felt impossibly long. Lucille kept her gaze fixed on Roman, who stood before his throne in full ceremonial regalia. He wore black and silver, the colors of the crown, and a circlet of silver rested on his dark hair. But it was his eyes, those stormy gray eyes that had first captured her on an auction platform, that gave her strength. She could see his pride, his love, his absolute certainty that she belonged here. And through their bond, she felt his steady presence, grounding her. When she reached the dais, Roman extended his hand. Lucille took it, and he helped her up the 3 steps to stand beside him. Blake followed, standing between them like a bridge connecting their separate pasts into one shared future. Roman's voice, when he spoke, carried throughout the vast room with preternatural clarity. "Wolves of the Northern Territories, I have called you here to witness a sacred rite, the claiming and coronation of my mate, Lucille Davies, as your queen." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lucille caught sight of several council members who'd opposed their mating, their expressions ranging from resignation to barely concealed hostility. But there were others like Bobby Cherry, standing with the royal guard whose faces showed nothing but approval. "Some of you have questioned my choice of mate," Roman continued, his voice hardening. "You have cited her lack of rank, her connection to a traitor, your concerns about bloodline and tradition." His eyes swept the assembly, and several wolves lowered their gazes under the weight of his stare. "Let me be clear. I did not choose Lucille. The moon goddess chose her for me, and I will not hear another word spoken against my mate or my son." The emphasis on "my son" as he placed a hand on Blake's shoulder sent a clear message. Blake was his heir, regardless of blood. "Today we honor the old ways," Roman said, his tone shifting to something more formal, more ritual. "The claiming ceremony that has bound Alpha Kings to their queens for 7 generations. Let all who witness remember that this bond is sacred and unbreakable." He turned to face Lucille fully, taking both her hands in his. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. "Lucille Davies," Roman said, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony but his eyes full of personal devotion. "Do you accept the bond between us? Do you claim me as your mate, your partner, your equal in all things?" "I do," Lucille said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Do you accept the responsibility of ruling beside me? Of protecting our packs, defending our territories, and upholding the laws and traditions of our kind?" "I do." "And do you accept the magic of the crown itself? To bind yourself not just to me, but to this kingdom, to become one with the land and the wolves who call it home?" This was the moment that would change everything. Once she said yes, there would be no going back. She would be bound to the kingdom until death, tied to its fate, in ways she was only beginning to understand. Lucille looked at Blake, saw his brave little face looking up at her with complete trust. Then she looked at Roman, at the man who'd saved them, protected them, loved them with a fierceness that still took her breath away. "I do," she said firmly. Roman's eyes flashed gold with emotion. He released one of her hands to pick up a ceremonial dagger from the altar beside them. The blade gleamed in the candlelight, ancient and powerful. "Then by blood and magic, by moon and stone, I bind us together." He drew the blade across his palm, then offered it to Lucille. She took it with steady hands and made her own cut. Their blood welled up, bright red against pale skin. Roman pressed their palms together, their fingers interlacing. The magic hit like lightning. Lucille gasped as power surged through her, starting at their joined hands and spreading through her entire body. It was overwhelming. She could feel the kingdom itself, the vast network of pacts and territories stretching across the land. She could sense the health of the forests, the flow of rivers, the turning of seasons. And beneath it all, a vast well of ancient power that was now hers to draw upon. "Do you feel it?" Roman asked softly, only for her ears. "Yes," she breathed. "It's incredible. And terrifying. Welcome to being queen." He turned back to the assembly, still holding her bloodied hand in his. "The bond is sealed. Lucille is my mate, bound by blood and magic. She is your queen, and you will treat her as such." Helene Wilcox, the palace steward who'd been so disapproving weeks ago, stepped forward, carrying the queen's crown on its velvet cushion. Her expression was unreadable as she knelt before the dais. Roman took the crown and turned to Lucille. "This crown has been worn by 7 queens before you. Each one faced challenges, opposition, moments where they questioned whether they were strong enough." He raised the circlet. "Each one proved that strength comes not from birthright or bloodline, but from courage, from love, from the willingness to fight for what matters." He placed the crown on her head, and Lucille felt another surge of power, gentler this time, but no less significant. The weight of the crown was surprisingly light, but the responsibility it represented was immense. "I present to you," Roman announced, his voice ringing with pride, "Lucille Robinson, Queen of the Northern Territories, my mate, my equal, my heart." The throne room erupted, not with dissent or protest, but with the sound of hundreds of wolves howling in recognition of their new queen. The noise was deafening, primal, and unexpectedly moving. Lucille's eyes filled with tears as she looked out at the assembled wolves, some who'd doubted her, others who'd supported her, all now acknowledging her place beside their king. Through the bond she felt Roman's satisfaction, his relief, his overwhelming love. Blake tugged on her gown. "Mama, they're howling for you." Lucille laughed through her tears and scooped him up, holding him on her hip despite the formal nature of the ceremony. "They're howling for us, sweetheart. For our family." Roman placed his hand on her back, and together they stood before their kingdom, a found family forged through hardship and sealed with blood. Not the family any of them had planned, but perhaps the one they were always meant to be. The formal ceremony continued with oaths of fealty from the territorial alphas, each one kneeling before the dais and swearing their loyalty to the crown. Lucille watched carefully, noting which wolves seemed sincere, and which offered their oaths with barely concealed resentment. Victor Serrano, the council head who'd been most vocal in his opposition, approached the dais with stiff movements. He knelt, but his eyes when they met Lucille's were cold. "I swear fealty to the crown," he said, his voice flat. "And to Queen Lucille, maid of our king." "Your oath is accepted," Roman said formally. But through their bond, Lucille felt his suspicion. Victor might have sworn fealty, but his heart wasn't in it. As Victor retreated, Roman leaned close to whisper in Lucille's ear. "Watch him. He was too closely aligned with Travis. I don't trust his sudden capitulation." Lucille nodded slightly, committing the warning to memory. This was part of being queen, learning to read people, to understand the political currents flowing beneath polite surfaces. The ceremony finally concluded as evening fell. A feast had been prepared in the great hall, and Lucille found herself seated beside Roman at the high table, Blake on her other side. Courses of food she'd never seen before appeared and disappeared, accompanied by music and entertainment. But despite the celebration, Lucille couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A prickling at the back of her neck, a whisper through the new magical connection she had with the kingdom that all was not well. "Roman," she said quietly, leaning close so only he could hear. "Something's not right." His hand found hers beneath the table. "What are you sensing?" "I don't know exactly. Just wrongness. Like a discordant note in a symphony." She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the sensation through the crown's magic. "It's coming from the eastern wing. Near—" her eyes snapped open. "Near the guest quarters, where the visiting alphas are staying." Roman was on his feet instantly, his hand raising to signal Bobby Cherry. But before he could issue orders, a scream pierced through the music and laughter. Then the eastern wing exploded. The blast shook the entire palace, sending wolves tumbling from their chairs. Lucille grabbed Blake, shielding him with her body as debris rained down. Through the chaos, she heard screaming, smelled smoke and blood and burning flesh. Roman was already moving, barking orders to the guards. "Evacuate the civilians, contain the fire, find out what happened." But Lucille knew. Through the crown's magic, she could feel it wolfsbane bombs, hidden throughout the guest quarters, timed to detonate during the feast when all the visiting alphas would be in the Great Hall. It wasn't an attack on the palace. It was an attack on the territorial leaders themselves. Someone wanted to kill not just the king and queen, but every alpha with the power to oppose them. "Roman," she called over the chaos. "It's not just one bomb. There are more." Roman's head whipped toward her. "Where?" Lucille closed her eyes, reaching out with the strange new sense the crown had given her. She could feel them pockets of wrongness scattered throughout the palace like poisonous seeds. 3 more. One in the barracks, one in the stables. One in her blood ran cold. One in the royal nursery. Roman's face drained of color. The nursery was where several visiting alphas had left their children, thinking them safe. "Bobby, with me," Roman shouted. "Lucille, get Blake to safety. Now." "I'm coming with you," Lucille said, setting Blake down and looking around desperately for someone she trusted. Her eyes landed on Sean, helping an elderly wolf to her feet. "Sean, take Blake to the tower. Don't open the door for anyone but me or the king." "But Mama," Blake started. "No arguments, baby. Go with Sean. Now." As Sean hurried Blake away, Lucille grabbed the skirts of her ceremonial gown and ran after Roman. She could hear him protesting through the bond, demanding she stay safe, but she ignored him. The crown's magic was her advantage. She could sense where the bombs were in ways he couldn't. They reached the nursery to find it already evacuated, guards rushing children to safety, but one bomb remained, hidden behind a wardrobe. "There." Lucille pointed. Roman was beside it in seconds, examining the device. "It's on a timer. Maybe 2 minutes before detonation. Can you disarm it?" "Not without the right tools." He looked up at her, and Lucille saw the decision forming in his eyes. "I need to get it outside, away from the palace. But the windows are too small. And I can't make it down the stairs in time." Lucille understood what he wasn't saying. He was going to try anyway, even if it killed him. "No," she said firmly. "There has to be another way." But there wasn't. And they both knew it. Roman stood, cradling the bomb carefully, his expression resolved. "Get everyone clear. That's an order, Queen Lucille." Through their bond, Lucille felt his love, his regret, his absolute determination to save his people, even at the cost of his own life. And she felt something else, the crown's magic, vast and powerful, waiting to be used. "Wait," she breathed. "I think I can." She reached out with the magic, feeling for the wrongness of the bomb, the poison of the wolfsbane. And then, drawing on instinct she didn't know she had, she pulled. The magic responded. Power flowed through her, into the bomb, neutralizing the wolfsbane, and disrupting whatever mechanism was supposed to trigger the explosion. The device went inert in Roman's hands. They both stared at it in disbelief. Then Roman laughed, a wild, relieved sound that bordered on hysteria. "You just saved us all." Lucille swayed, suddenly exhausted. "I have no idea how I did that. The crown's magic. You're more powerful than I thought possible." Roman set down the now harmless bomb and pulled her into his arms. "You brilliant, terrifying woman." But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more bombs remained, and Lucille had to find them before they detonated. The barracks bomb was next. Lucille neutralized it the same way, though the effort left her trembling. The stables bomb followed, and by the time it was disarmed, Lucille could barely stand. Roman caught her as her legs gave out. "That's enough. You've done enough. Is everyone safe?" she asked weakly. "Yes, thanks to you." He lifted her in his arms, carrying her like she weighed nothing. "The eastern wing is damaged but contained. No fatalities. You saved them all, Lucille." As Roman carried her back to their chambers, Lucille let her eyes drift closed. Through the crown's magic, she could feel the kingdom settling, the panic receding, order being restored. She'd proven herself tonight. Not just as Roman's mate, but as queen in her own right. But as sleep claimed her, one thought echoed through her exhausted mind. Whoever had planted those bombs was still out there, and they'd just declared war on the crown. The battle was far from over. Chapter 10, The Queen's Justice. Lucille woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Roman's arms wrapped protectively around her. For a moment, she simply breathed, grateful to be alive, to feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. Then the memories of the previous night crashed over her. The explosion, the bombs, the raw power she'd channeled to save the palace. Her entire body ached with exhaustion, as if she'd run for miles without stopping. "Easy," Roman murmured, tightening his hold as she stirred. "You've been asleep for almost 12 hours. Your body needs to recover from using that much magic." Lucille turned in his arms to face him. "Blake? Safe with Sean. I checked on him 3 times during the night. He's worried about you, but he's fine." Roman brushed hair back from her face, his expression tender. "You were incredible last night, Lucille. You saved hundreds of lives. Did you find out who planted the bombs?" Roman's expression darkened. "We captured 2 of the conspirators, trying to flee the palace. They've been questioned." Lucille heard what he wasn't saying. The interrogation had been brutal. "And Victor Serrano orchestrated it. He's been working with Travis Foster's remaining supporters to destabilize the crown. The plan was to kill the territorial alphas and blame it on us, make it look like we'd murdered them during the claiming ceremony." Roman's jaw clenched. "It would have worked too. Without you sensing the bombs through the crown's magic, they would have detonated, and we'd be facing open rebellion from every territory." "Where is Victor now?" "Locked in the dungeons awaiting trial, along with 8 other conspirators, including 2 council members, and 1 of my own guards." The betrayal in Roman's voice cut deep. "I've been too lenient, too willing to play politics instead of rooting out threats." Lucille sat up despite her body's protests. "This isn't your fault, Roman. You couldn't have known how deep the conspiracy went. I should have known. I'm the Alpha King. It's my job to know." He sat up beside her, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "Travis, Victor, who knows how many others. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. And I was so focused on protecting you and Blake that I missed the larger threat." "You didn't miss anything," Lucille said firmly. "You've been fighting on multiple fronts: the council, the conspirators, border threats. No one could have managed all of that perfectly." She took his hand. "But now we know the scope of what we're facing. Now we can end this." Roman looked at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "A trial. Public, transparent, with all the evidence laid bare. Show the Pax exactly what Victor and his allies were planning. Let them see the truth." Lucille's mind was racing now, the strategic thinking that had kept her and Blake alive through Jeremiah's disgrace coming to the fore. "They can't claim we're tyrants if we follow the law, but they also can't escape justice if everyone sees their guilt." A slow smile spread across Roman's face. "Have I mentioned how brilliant you are?" "Not in the last few hours," Lucille replied with a small smile. Then her expression sobered. "But Roman, if we do this, if we hold a public trial, it has to be fair. We can't just execute them without due process, no matter how much they deserve it. Even though they tried to kill you? Kill Blake? Especially because of that. We're not them, Roman. We don't rule through fear and murder. We rule through justice and strength." Lucille squeezed his hand. "Show the Pax that we're better than the wolves who tried to destroy us." Roman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way. But Lucille, if they're found guilty, and they will be, the punishment is death. That's non-negotiable. I know, Lucille said quietly. And I accept that. Some crimes are unforgivable. The trial was set for 3 days later, giving the territorial alphas time to review the evidence and prepare. The throne room was once again filled to capacity, but this time the atmosphere was tense rather than celebratory. Victor Serrano and his co-conspirators were brought in chains, their faces haggard from days in the dungeons. Victor held himself with dignity despite the circumstances, his expression defiant as he was forced to kneel before the throne. Roman sat in judgment, with Lucille beside him wearing the queen's crown. Blake was not present. Lucille had insisted he not witness what was about to unfold. Victor Serrano, Roman's voice rang out across the assembled wolves. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit mass murder, and attempting to overthrow the crown. How do you plead? Victor lifted his chin. I plead not guilty. Everything I've done for the good of the kingdom. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Roman's expression didn't change, but Lucille felt his anger through their bond. For the good of the kingdom, Roman repeated slowly. Explain how planting wolfsbane bombs throughout the palace during a sacred ceremony serves the kingdom. You've weakened us, Victor said, his voice carrying across the room. Taking an Omega of no rank as your queen, claiming a dead traitor's pup as your heir. You've made us look foolish, vulnerable. The other kingdoms see our Alpha King controlled by his mates. Careful. Roman's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Choose your next words very carefully. Victor smiled coldly. I speak only truth, your majesty. You've let sentiment cloud your judgment. A true king would have taken a mate who strengthened alliances, who brought power and prestige to the crown. Instead, you claimed the first pretty Omega who caught your eye. Lucille felt Roman's fury building, felt him prepare to lunge at Victor. She placed her hand on his arm, a gentle restraint. May I? She asked quietly. Roman looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Then he nodded, leaning back in his throne. Lucille stood, and the room fell silent. Every eye turned to her as she descended the dais steps until she stood directly before Victor. You speak of weakness, she said, her voice clear and steady. Of sentiment clouding judgment. Tell me, Victor, what do you see when you look at me? Victor's lip curled. I see a foolish girl who got lucky, who happened to be in the right place when the king's rut made him desperate for any Omega nearby. Wrong, Lucille said flatly. You see someone you underestimated. You saw an easy target. A widow with no family, no resources, no political connections. You thought if you could kill me or my son, you could break the king and seize power in the chaos that followed. She circled him slowly, and Victor's eyes tracked her movement with growing unease. But you made a mistake, Lucille continued. You assumed that because I have no rank, I have no strength. That because I was auctioned like property, I must be weak. You never considered that surviving what I've survived requires more strength than you'll ever possess. Pretty words, Victor sneered. But words don't change reality. You're still nothing but a queen, Lucille interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. I am queen of the Northern Territories, chosen by the moon goddess herself as the Alpha King's true mate. I am the one who sensed your bombs before they detonated. I am the one who saved hundreds of lives while you cowered in the shadows. And I am the one standing here in judgment of you. She stepped closer, and Victor actually flinched. You want to talk about weakness? Lucille's voice was soft now, deadly. Let's talk about a man so weak he has to plant bombs rather than face his enemies in honorable combat. Let's talk about someone so insecure in his own power that he targets children to make a point. Let's talk about a wolf so pathetic that his grand plan for seizing the throne was to kill everyone who might oppose him and hope chaos worked in his favor. The assembled wolves were utterly silent. Even Roman seemed transfixed by her words. I may have been born without rank, Lucille said. But I've earned my place here. Through courage, through sacrifice, through the strength to stand beside an Alpha King and not be diminished by his shadow. What have you earned, Victor, besides a traitor's death? Victor's face had gone pale, then red with rage. You dare. I dare many things, Lucille said calmly. Because I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of any of you who think birth determines worth, who believe power comes from crushing others rather than lifting them up. She turned to address the full assembly. This conspiracy, Travis Foster, Victor Serrano, all their supporters, they represent an old way of thinking. A way that says some wolves matter more than others based on bloodline rather than merit. That uses fear and violence instead of justice and honor. She walked back to the dais, climbing the steps to stand beside Roman. That way ends today, she declared. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through justice. We will hear all the evidence. We will give these conspirators every chance to defend themselves. And then, when their guilt is proven beyond doubt, we will show them exactly what happens to wolves who threaten this kingdom. Roman stood, placing his hand over hers. Well said, my queen. He turned his attention back to Victor. You will have your trial. You will hear the evidence against you, and then the assembled alphas will judge whether you live or die. The trial lasted 2 full days. Witnesses testified about the conspiracy, about secret meetings and coded messages. The captured bombers broke down under questioning, revealing the full scope of the plot. Physical evidence was presented, the remaining bombs, correspondence between conspirators, financial records showing bribes and payments. Through it all, Victor maintained his defiance, insisting he'd acted in the kingdom's best interest. But as the evidence mounted, his support crumbled. Even his closest allies began to distance themselves, recognizing a lost cause. On the evening of the second day, Roman called for judgment. Territorial alphas, he said formally. You have heard the evidence. You have seen the proof of this conspiracy. Now you must decide, are these wolves guilty of treason against the crown? One by one, the alphas rose to give their verdict. The votes were unanimous, guilty on all counts. The sentence for high treason is death, Roman declared. To be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Does anyone speak for mercy? Silence answered him. Not one wolf stood to defend Victor and his allies. Victor laughed bitterly. So much for justice and fairness. You've orchestrated this entire spectacle to justify murdering your political opponents. No, Lucille said. We gave you a fair trial. We presented evidence and allowed you to defend yourself. You were judged by your peers, not by us. This is justice, Victor. It just doesn't look the way you hoped. The executions were carried out at dawn in the palace courtyard. Lucille didn't attend. She had no desire to watch wolves die, even wolves who'd tried to kill her and her son. But Roman went, as was his duty as Alpha King. Through their bond, she felt his sorrow mixed with grim satisfaction. He took no pleasure in death, but he was satisfied that justice had been served. When it was over, Roman returned to their chambers and pulled Lucille into his arms, holding her tightly. It's done, he said simply. The conspiracy is broken. The remaining supporters have fled or sworn renewed fealty. We're safe. Are we? Lucille asked. There will always be wolves who oppose us, Roman, who see me as unworthy or Blake as an outsider. Perhaps, Roman agreed. But after yesterday, after they saw you face down Victor, after they witnessed your strength, I think fewer wolves will be willing to underestimate you. You've proven yourself, Lucille, not just as my mate, but as queen in your own right. Lucille leaned into his embrace, letting herself feel safe for the first time in weeks. What happens now? Now? Roman pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes warm with love. Now we live. We raise our son. We rule our kingdom. We build the life we were meant to have. Just like that? Just like that, Roman confirmed. No more conspiracies, no more threats, just us and our family. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sean entered with Blake, who immediately ran to them. Mama, Papa Roman, can we go riding today, please? Lucille laughed, scooping him up despite her still recovering body. Yes, sweetheart, I think that sounds perfect. As they prepared for their ride, Lucille caught sight of herself in the mirror, wearing riding clothes instead of royal finery, her hair in a simple braid, Blake chattering excitedly beside her, and Roman smiling as he helped their son with his boots. This was what she'd fought for. Not power or prestige, but this simple domesticity, the chance to be a family without fear, without threats looming over them. They'd started on an auction block with nothing but desperation and hope. Now they had a kingdom, a home, and each other. It wasn't the life Lucille had imagined when she'd married Jeremiah all those years ago. It wasn't even the life she'd imagined when Roman had first claimed them. It was so much better. 6 months later, snow blanketed the palace grounds, turning everything into a winter wonderland. Lucille stood at the window of the royal chambers, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, watching Blake build a snowman with Guy in the gardens below. Roman came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, and placing his hand over hers. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. "Tired, nauseous, absolutely terrified." Lucille turned to look at him, but also happy. Roman's eyes shone with emotion. "A daughter," he said wonderingly. "The healer confirmed it this morning. We're having a daughter." "Blake will be thrilled," Lucille said with a smile. "He's been asking for a sister since we told him about the baby. And you? Are you thrilled?" Lucille thought about everything they'd been through: the auction, the conspiracies, the bombs, the trials. She thought about how far they'd come from that terrifying day when she'd stood on a platform expecting the worst. "I'm more than thrilled," she said. "I'm blessed. With you, with Blake, with this life we've built, and now with our daughter." Roman kissed her tenderly. "I love you, Lucille Robinson. My mate, my queen, the mother of my children." "I love you too," Lucille whispered against his lips, "more than I ever thought possible." Below in the gardens, Blake's laughter rang out clear and bright. In the palace behind them, servants went about their duties in a household finally at peace. And in the territories beyond, wolves lived and thrived under rulers who valued justice over power, mercy over cruelty. The trader's widow had become a queen. The auction platform had led to a throne. And the Alpha King who'd arrived and said, "I'll take them," had given Lucille and Blake not just safety, but a family, a purpose, and a love that would endure for all their days. It was, Lucille thought as Roman held her close, the perfect happy ending to a story that had begun in darkness. Or perhaps, she amended as she felt their daughter kick beneath her hand, it wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning. Dear viewers, from auction block to throne, quite the journey, wasn't it? Here's my question. Did Lucille save herself, or did Roman save her? Or was it something else entirely? Comment your take, and if you loved this story, please leave a like.